She's in. Must be. Councillor Braithwaite is on her way in the room.
She is
I'm
here
here.
now. That is
Sorry.
fantastic.
It was crazy trying to get connected. I apologize.
No, it's okay. We all, maybe not all of us, several of us had similar issues of trying to get logged on. So thank you and welcome. And with Councillor Braithwaite's arrival, we can move to the agenda for tonight. It is Committee of the Whole for Monday, April the 19th. Welcome everyone. As we start this meeting, we just acknowledge the land on which we're gathered is the traditional territory of the Coast and Strait Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen speaking people known today as the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations, and their connections to these lands continue to this day. Up first, we have just approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover and a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any discussion, changes? Councillor Braithwaite?
Yes, thank you. I did notice that we did discuss, I think a few months back, about the public participation period, perhaps being moved up in the agenda. We were going to try it further down in the agenda and we were going to perhaps move it back up in the agenda. I'm just wondering if you have an update on that.
Yes, it wasn't on this agenda. We had that discussion today with staff about moving it. Not wanting to get in a position where people thought they were coming in later to give the public participation. We didn't want to move it this meeting. But my understanding is next Committee of the Whole forward, we're going to move it up further into the agenda so that people who just want to address council on items that aren't on the agenda or have that opportunity earlier in the meeting. So yes, you're quite correct. We did have that discussion. This is our second try at it with it this way, but it still lands quite far down into the agenda. And so to give people the optimal amount of opportunity to just address us, we're going to move it up.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. A question about the agenda. Some of the agenda is quite clear that the public is entitled to speak. Other parts is unclear because it doesn't specify. For example, for item number 3, excuse me, item number 5, is the public available to speak to item number 5? Even though it doesn't.
Yes, item 5.1 and 5.2 are at the Committee of the Whole. Welcome.
Right.
Public is welcome. Any other discussion on the agenda? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. We have adoption of Committee of the Whole meetings. We have a number of sets from February through beginning of March. We can move them at once and make any changes. Go ahead. Moved by Councillor Braithwaite. Seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion, changes, corrections to any of those minutes? Not seeing any. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Great. And item 4.1, Mayor and Council verbal reports. This is just the opportunity for members of Council to provide an update to the rest of Council in terms of any of the committees or commissions or other boards that they might be sitting on anything, items of interest that you think or might be of interest to other members of the committee. Would anybody like to provide an update? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to, I know that everybody received an email in regards to the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal and Communities for about the conference and AGM, which will be on Friday, May 28th. Just a reminder that the Yes Awards nomination form will hopefully go out this week. I'm not sure how we're going to be celebrating Yes Awards, but we will, Councillor Appleton and I will figure something fabulous out. We're just not sure what it's going to be yet. And the Royal McPherson Theatre Society AGM is on May 7th. And I believe our first meeting of the Public Arts Advisory Committee will be on April 28th. So I look forward to that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braithwaite. I have Councillor Green, then Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor. You can hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we had our first advisory design panel meeting last week, and our new chair or old chair is new again, and that's Will is our new chair. And it was a good meeting. We looked at 5 applications, and I think it's a very strong group. I was really impressed with the tenor of the meeting and the input from all the new and former members. So thank you. And the tourism committee, I can't recall if I reported out on this before. Councillor Braithwaite and I attended the last tourism committee meeting, And of course, the tourism sector is still badly depressed, and it has implications for both the Oak Bay Beach Hotel and other tourism attractions in Oak Bay. So we continue to talk about that, and it is a great challenge for them, but they are incredibly optimistic and active. And in terms of the BIA, I'm just attempting to contact Heather Leary to talk to her. I know that the BIA has also had challenges with pandemic, but I'm very impressed that Oak Bay residents appear to be supporting all our local businesses as much as possible, and that message that we're putting out on the website to stay local, stay small, and support small business is really well received. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Appleton and Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very quickly reporting on the ongoing Greater Victoria Public Library strategic planning process, which is still underway. I am still chairing the working group that's dealing with that. It is an accelerated process that will deliver results in July. As Council will recall, there's a transitional 2-year strategic plan being assembled for the library right now. It was informed by the GVPL's annual board retreat happened on April the 10th. Most of the time there spent was, well, basically all of the time spent was on the strategic planning process and on the nature of library operations post-COVID. So there's some exciting, interesting conversations happening around that. So I look forward to sharing that with Council as that advances. And then last week, of course, was both the Heritage Foundation met as liaison to Heritage Foundation, and also the inaugural meeting for the Heritage Commission as well. And it's an exceptional group of folks that are participating in the Heritage Commission. Looking forward to working with them. And Bronwyn Taylor is your chair for this upcoming term. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to report out on the work that has started on the Regional Housing Trust Fund, a commission that I now sit on at the CRD level. I am continually impressed at the work being done at the regional level with respect to homelessness and supportive housing that we're all banding together to help out with. 1,893 units already built for families out there, and over 1,000 that are in process. Just incredible work that's happening. And thanks to the CRD and the Regional Housing Trust Fund Commission and the Regional Housing First program. I'm sure you already know, Mayor, of all the incredible work being done at that level. And if you have anything else to share about that, I would definitely love to hear about that as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I have Councillor Ney and then Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, just a very brief update, Mr. Mayor, and Council with my work on the South Island Prosperity Project, and there continue to be in planning around the Rising Economy Week and strategizing, looking for initiatives and during that week. So we'll keep you up to date as that unfolds.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I don't really have too much new on my liaison committees that I am on. However, I have been reminded that this week is National Volunteer Week. And this year's theme is the value of one, the power of many. So I just wanted to express how much I appreciate certainly all of the volunteers that have been really instrumental in keeping so many things running in this community and actually throughout the region. So I thought I would just throw that in as a reminder for everybody, express appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. My update is going to be brief. I actually sat in on a panel with through the Victoria Foundation with a couple of other mayors and some of the nonprofit leadership in the community, just looking at funding and restructuring and things. The nonprofit sector has been hit very hard. The funding is largely dried up from donors. The Yeah, and the traditional funding models are all shaken at this point. So very interesting and very challenging times. And this being the week of the volunteers, they rely so heavily on those volunteers. I think we need to. That was my feedback. We need to find ways of encouraging and supporting and thanking volunteers who are there, because it's so important, especially at this time. From my perspective on the CRD board, you're right, Councillor Zelka, there's an amazing amount of work being done on housing right now, more all the time, including some new funding from the federal government that is being quickly distributed to provide more housing on an emergency basis. So it's there's a lot happening there on that front. Something that's coming forward is that there was agreement from the board to move forward on evaluating or looking at some regional arts facilities possibilities. So there's going to be a working group struck for that at the board that will be delving into that for more detail. Ultimately, that has to go out for approval if a new service is started to all of the members for approval. So that's the hard part, is finding a model that can actually get support broadly and regionally. For the hospital district, I think you're probably aware, but the demolition go ahead was approved for the Oak Bay Lodge. So will be starting shortly. It's mostly remediation for the first few months, I understand, as they take out the asbestos and the hazardous materials. But you'll see that over the next 8 to 9 months coming down. As was in front of our board or our council, I guess a couple of weeks ago, the solid waste plan from the CRD is going through the environmental committee and back to the board next month for consideration of adoption or changes at that point. So I also just want to express my thanks to the police board because they've just completed almost completed their submission to the provincial special committee on the Police Act. Just really appreciate the amount of time and effort they spent on that to come up with a very thoughtful approach and submission. So that's my report. Councillor Day, your hand is still up within the app. I just want to make sure you don't have anything else to add. Nope. You're drinking it down. Okay, that's great. So next item on the agenda, we have draft policies and regulations, pickleball at Carnarvon Park. This is open for public input. We have 4 people who have requested to speak, and we'll go to those people shortly. Generally speaking, for those watching and participating, committee of the whole is a less formal approach to or gathering of council. So we're not here to make decisions. We're here to make recommendations or to seek more information that's required to make a decision. So as such, it's a little more informal in terms of discussion, but I will be going to council for questions. Staff will give a presentation. We'll go to council for questions, and then we'll go to the public for any comments or questions that the public might have. Then we'll come back to the table and we'll have a discussion about what might move forward. So with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Meikle, who is our manager of Parks and Recreation, to present his report. I really appreciate the detail there, but if you can give an overview, Mr. Meikle, that will put us in kick us off tonight.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair, I'll provide a brief overview of the issue. And for those not familiar with pickleball, the sport's played with a hard racket and a hard ball, which have some noise implications. And many communities, both locally and across North America, are experiencing similar issues between court neighbors and the sport itself, as have been outlined in this report. Pickleball utilizes similar infrastructure to tennis, which has meant that many tennis courts have been used or converted to pickleball courts. However, I think it's important to remember that the location of these existing courts was not originally planned with those noise implications of pickleball in mind. Over this past year of the pandemic, pickleball popularity has continued to grow, and given fears of COVID, many players have chosen to continue playing outdoors throughout the winter when they generally would have gone indoors and to play, which would have provided some respite from the noise of play for those nearest neighbors to Carnarvon Park. This report comes forward now as the continued play throughout the pandemic has appeared to increase some of those tensions and conflicts between these parties. I think it's also important to note that there are many ideas and options available and under consideration for the future provision of courts for pickleball. There is certainly a recognition of the need for courts, as I mentioned, of this growing sport, and of the physical and social health benefits of playing pickleball, of playing any sport for that matter. The options out there and ideas out there include those that are outlined in the Carnarvon Park Master Plan, which involves moving the courts further away from the park border and away from the neighbors, as well as options for creating courts elsewhere within the district. However, these all represent longer-term options with additional resource and community impact implications, which would require further investigation and may be brought forward to council in the future. So with this report tonight, staff are seeking direction from council on options to mitigate the immediate concerns and conflicts represented by the pickleball court usage at Carnarvon Park and the noise impact on those closest neighbors. Thank you.
Kevin, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Kevin.
Sorry about that. I was trying to be polite and turn off my background noise while the speaker was speaking. Yes, I was just saying that, as I said, we're just going to go to council for questions and then to the public. So up first, I saw Councillor Braithwaite, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And through you to Mr. Meikle. Mr. Meikle, do the pickleball players pay for the courts? And if yes, do we know approximately how much revenue that generates per year?
Mr. Meikle?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Braithwaite. There is an option for pickleball players to reserve courts. It's what we call block booking, so they can reserve courts for the season essentially, and on more short-term basis. And they do pay for that right to reserve times and days and times for the courts. We tend to, over the last few years, have averaged between $8,000 and $9,000 in revenue for those outdoor pickleball court rentals.
And I'm just out of curiosity, through you again, Mayor, to Mr. Meikle, how does that compare to tennis revenues? I would imagine it's a small percentage.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to Councillor Braithwaite. It's a little over half of our outdoor tennis rentals. Tennis is averaged about over the last couple of years, about between $13,000 and $14,000 in outdoor court rentals.
Okay, thank you. How long has the foam ball request been in effect with the pickleball players?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Mayor, and through the chair. It last 2 summers, I believe. I think we instituted it 2 summers ago, and then last summer we had some help, if you like, from the neighbors in distributing the foam balls to players. And so it was sort of a 2-phased approach of trying to get pickleball players to use those foam balls.
Okay, thank you. And I know that my other colleagues have some questions, so I'll just limit I'll just say my last question or ask my last question. And that is, I seem to remember a couple of years ago, I think when I was on Parks Rec and Culture Commission, we did have a conversation around having a pickleball court put in another location within the municipality. And I believe one of the locations that was looked at was on the other side of the Henderson Rec Center building, like close to the baseball diamond. And I'm just wondering, because I can't remember off the top of my head, how much about would it cost to put a standalone pickleball court in a different location, if we know?
Mr. Meikle, do we have an approximate of the cost of courts?
We have a very general order of magnitude cost for putting in 4 pickleball courts, which is roughly the size of a tennis court, starting from scratch. So having to build the basic foundation and groundwork, we're approximately $200,000.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I do have other questions, but I'll let my colleagues ask their questions first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I have Councillor Patterson, then Green, then Nay. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And through you to staff, I'm wondering if we have any way of estimating the number of participants in pickleball right now, how many of those may be Oak Bay residents versus external players, and And any estimate of how changing the hours, as is recommended in the report, what percentage of those players would be impacted by that? Do we have any information on those statistics?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Meikle, what do we know about our pickleball players?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, and through the chair to Councillor Patterson. We don't have very firm or very specific or detailed statistics on, especially on the location of where the players are coming from and who's an Oak Bay resident or not. We do know that we just completed the block booking session for this summertime, and all of the block booking that happened occurred during the daytime, mostly Monday to Friday daytime, with a couple of sessions booked on weekends during the daytime. And that, I believe, represents approximately sort of 40 to 50 players, but I don't, so I apologize, I don't have the exact numbers.
Thank you.
That's helpful, thank you. I don't have a lot of background in this. I don't play pickleball, so I'm not personally familiar with it. But in the staff report, it did say this year, because of changing circumstances this year, that unlike previous years, the courts were used pretty well continuously throughout the year. And so what do we think would happen in the future? Is it just so, has the sport grown so much that there's such a need for courts that we should expect that there might be a continued year-round demand for this? Or perhaps is it expected that it would revert back to what it was previously, which was basically a good weather sport, I'll put it that way.
Thank you. Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Mayor, and through the chair to Councillor Patterson. My expectation and opinion would be that COVID played a large role this past year in terms of players wanting to stay outside. We had a number of players concerned about playing indoors. We do offer indoor pickleball play at the Henderson Recreation Center. And coupled with this year, there was also further restrictions indoor versus outdoor play in terms of the number of people in a space and the number of people that can play at any given time. So we may see, you're correct in that we are seeing continued growth of the sport, and we may see continued play outdoors through the winter in the future, but I suspect we'd see gradual migration back to indoors when back in non-COVID times, so to speak.
Thank you. That's useful. And also, because it sounds like it has somewhat evolved, and of course, is a growing sport. I'm wondering, perhaps, Mayor, if staff could just do a very brief evolution of how this occurred in how the courts came to be in Oak Bay, and what, if any, public engagement took place when the courts were set up.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. And before I pass that to Mr. Meikle, if I can just ask members of anybody who's not a councillor to turn off your video stream, because otherwise I lose the order on my screen when videos pop up and off again. So thank you for that. Mr. Meikle, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair to Councillor Patterson. So my understanding here would be, just about, would have been, I think, in 2014-ish, as pickleball was growing in popularity in the region, pickleball players began to play of their own accord, which certainly are capable of doing, of their own accord at Carnarvon Park. The tennis courts at Carnarvon were seeing less use. They were not as well used, certainly, as Henderson courts, nor as Windsor. So I think pickleball players took the opportunity to begin playing there. They were taking their own steps to modify the court as they needed to. So putting, for example, weighting down the net. So the net in pickleball is lower than it is in tennis. Putting some of their own court markings on the court with chalk, etc. So they took that impetus themselves to begin playing there. I think that went on for probably, I believe, 2 summers. And in 2016, it was staff converted one of those tennis courts at Carnarvon into the 4 pickleball courts to support play there. I'm not aware of any formal consultation or engagement that went on with the public at that time. It was, I would say, more of an organic process whereby, as mentioned, pickleball players found a place to play and began playing there, and so was looked at as a need, and how do we help support that need.
Thank you. And I'll just ask one last question before I turn it over to others who are still waiting. Mayor, if I may. The staff, as was said in the first introduction of the staff report by Mr. Meikle, the noise or the sport itself is fairly noisy, and so and that this is not a problem that is unique to Oak Bay. Certainly, it is. As the sport grows, I suppose also the challenges grow to municipalities trying to accommodate this. And so I'm wondering if, as a result of that, if our staff is aware of any standards which have developed. I'm thinking of the ASA, the Acoustical Standards Association, or the ANSI. Any guidance now for pickleball standards, acoustical standards that we would try to achieve if in an ideal world we had started from scratch and we were establishing courts today.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair to Councillor Patterson. I'm not aware of any standards of that type at this point. I am aware that a number of other districts, and again, across North America, California has certainly, I think, been at this a bit longer than many other jurisdictions. And again, what I've read about is that many jurisdictions have brought in acoustical engineers to do some work on the parks. There is the development of some noise mitigating baffling, for example, or fencing or screening that goes up on fencing to help mitigate some of the noise, none of which totally absolve the noise, however. And so there's more of those kind of options. I think we're in a place with pickleball where, as you see with any sport evolution, many of these issues come up as the sport begins to evolve, and we're still in that, what we've seen is exponential evolution with pickleball, and things are moving quickly, and we're still learning a great deal out there.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have next Councillor Green, and then Ney, and then Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, thank you, Mr. Meikle, for the extensive report. I appreciate it. Just a few questions. I just wondered how many direct neighbors are impacted by pickleball at the moment, who are the most vocal about the noise? Do you have an approximation of how many neighboring properties are directly affected?
Mr. Meikle.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair to Councillor Green. There are, I believe, 6 neighbors on Allenby that are generally the most affected, and there are 2 across Henderson Road that we've heard less from, but I believe have had issues in the past as well.
Thank you. And how many players do you think approximately are using those courts on a daily basis? Would you have just an approximate ballpark number?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair, it can vary. We certainly have days where we will see upwards of 60 plus players on there, and I would say a fair average is likely in the 40 players per day. But that again, it does really ebb and flow, and it's a little difficult to say this year because of there has also been outdoor restrictions on gatherings outdoors. So I'm going back to 2019 to try to recall where numbers were at that point. So
yes, thank you. And just one final question. You did mention the acoustic mitigation, and I'm assuming that would be possible on this particular site at Carnarvon. But Is there the possibility of another location on the Carnarvon site that could accommodate pickleball and not be as intrusive for these 6 neighbors? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair, the Carnarvon Park Master Plan, which was approved by Council in 2019, does recommend moving the courts further inwards, if you like, or further away from the border of the park to where the current approximately where the current location of the lacrosse box is, and which does, would provide some space, some distance from or mitigating distance from the neighbors. As well, the master plan does prescribe that there would then be, where the existing courts are now, would be some further greenery and a what I think we term as a multi-wheels play area, if you like. So for children and adults to use multiple versions of wheels to participate on, from scooters to et cetera, on that space. So there would be some play space in between the neighbors and the courts. We did take a look at the noise mitigating screens in the past there, and unfortunately they do mitigate noise, but they are also opaque, so you cannot see through them. So it does create a visual block as well for those neighbors, unfortunately, so they wouldn't be able to enjoy the vision of the park that they currently have. And those screens at the time, this was 2 years ago that we took a look at those, were about $10,000 to put up the noise mitigating screens at that point. I will say Saanich, District of Saanich at Tulmy Park has tried to put up did put up the noise mitigating screens, and anecdotally have heard that it has not been overly effective there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meikle. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Nays, Zelka, and Appleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To you, staff, Mr. Meikle. Yeah, thank you for the report and all the work you've been doing trying to sort of mediate the ongoing conflicts that are occurring here. So the question I have has to do with the option 1, where it's to reduce park hours to 6 o'clock to closure from 6 to 9 in the morning. So obviously, it's not able to be a self-regulating situation, if I've understood, because people aren't being compliant with the notice that currently is there to only use the foam balls during the hours that you previously had. So my question to Mr. Meikle is, you do indicate in the report that the closure hours that you're recommending are the most expedient and cost-effective approach to mitigating the conflict. I'm wondering if you could help us understand what other options there may be here to deal with enforcement specifically, or to get. I guess maybe the question would be to increase compliance of the non-noisy apparatus that's being recommended to mitigate noise, the neighbors.
Mr. Meikle, you have some in the report, but no costs or anything. Just would that require an additional report to come back with some understanding of the impacts?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair, yes, I would require to bring back an additional report to outline the staffing cost to have staff there nightly to monitor court usage. It is my understanding that from pickleball players, and we'll likely hear from pickleball players, that the foam balls do change the very nature of play and change the game itself. So it's not desirable, as it does change the play significantly for them. So, but yes, I would need to bring back an additional staff report to get you some specific costs on that for staff resourcing. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Mayor, just to add another question. So, I heard there was something about using different paddles. I do know I played pickleball myself and the foam things don't work, but I have understood that a different paddle changes the noise to some significant degree. Has that been tried out? Or are you aware of that, Mr. Meikle? Or?
Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. I am aware of that, but however, similar with equipment in other sports, my understanding is that some of those paddles do get more expensive and can be prohibitive for some individuals to purchase. We would also be in the same position of trying to enforce mandatory use, so to speak, of those paddles should we go down that road. But that is an option, as I understand, that is out there. Paddles are made of different materials that don't have quite the same noise implications as the wood paddles.
So how effective do you think a kind of more stringent signage may be? Because it's been a pretty gentle message, understandably, because we don't have any bylaw to fine individuals at this point. But I'm just wondering, just to help council consider moving forward here, Mr. Meikle, do you have any sense about, I mean, one letter writer wrote, put a sign up and, fine people $100 if they're not going to be in compliant with the requirements. Do you have any sense of that kind of enforcement strategy?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. A little bit difficult to say exactly how effective that would be. I don't. We certainly in Parks, Rec, and Culture are not in a position to levy fines, so to speak.
No,
so,
no.
and it's my experience right now with trying to enforce COVID rules has been challenging, to say the least. And so it's really difficult to say whether the threat of that kind of fine would ultimately lead to a change in behavior. I think at the crux of it, the noise mitigating equipment suggested for this game changed the very nature of the game for the players, and I think that's kind of one of the issues for players at this end. It's not really just about flouting the rules, so to speak. It's not the same game when you're using that different equipment, and so I think that's part of the crux of the issue here. And I think we'd likely just have players not playing at that time if there was the threat of a fine. So maybe counterproductive in that way.
Okay. And just finally, if I may, Mr. Mayor, one final question. In terms of relocating in the longer term, the pickleball courts, as you mentioned earlier, the master plan, Carnarvon master plan talked about pickleball courts where the lacrosse court is. In the interim, if this were something that council were to consider, and we were to move more, not 5-6 years out, but before that master plan was implemented, that we consider some temporary pickleball courts in that lacrosse box. Let's say it was half of the box to leave it open for other uses, but about how many courts could you get in there? And based on that, I know you have a report, and this may not be a fair question to ask, but I can't imagine that would be the $200,000 cost. Do you have any ballpark number in terms of putting some temporary courts in that lacrosse box?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair to Councillor Green. We have an order of magnitude cost to put 4 pickleball courts into the lacrosse box. I think, leaving space for other potential uses, families, for example, playing ball hockey, etc. You may be able to fit 6 in there, but the order of magnitude cost we've received from a consultant would be approximately $50,000 to fix all the cracks and fix the deficiencies in the ground to make it safe for play in there, to resurface it, and to put posts and nets in on part of that court. However, I would say that I would bring back another report to council with some more details and specifics of what that looks like should you want to go that route.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, I just have a question, just to understand that number and the possibility of using that, of having that money. Would that require going to another budget year, or is that a kind of sum of money that could be found in this current budget. If that was the will of the council to go down that route.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Nay. I think it would have that question would be answered in the course of the more detailed staff report about what those financing options would be. I think we couldn't make that decision tonight because we wouldn't know for sure.
Well, the reason I'm asked, well, yeah, okay. So, because from my thinking, if it's going to be a project that wouldn't be done for 2 years out, that for my thinking, the whole thing becomes different as opposed to a more immediate kind of option for us. So that's the basis of the question. So I don't know if there's any way to get some kind of inkling before this meeting, but okay, thank you.
Well, in fairness, just for everybody's clarity, I think the point of the meeting today will be to give some direction, either to get more information like that to come back, or to give a direction contingent upon some information coming back that will support that direction. So there's nothing stopping us from ultimately giving some direction that would be subject to, a staff report coming back that gives out some of those details. So
Okay, thank
leave
you.
it there. Councillor, unless Mr. Meikle, I didn't want to cut you off on that one. Was there anything else you wish to add?
No, thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair, I think just timing of that, the other end of that would depend on when contractors, et cetera, would be available to do that kind of work. And given the summer is obviously their busy season to do court resurfacing all around the island and even throughout the province, that may be difficult this year anyhow, but certainly it could bring forward more information as required by council or as requested by council.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I'm just making reference to the notation in the report that indicates that the majority of players continue to use the standard hard style ball after 4 p.m. And I understand that the local residents have been involved in distributing the softer ball, or at least in helping to encourage the use of the softer ball. So what I read by this then, and I'm just seeking to confirm that the majority of users are declining to use the soft ball, even if it's offered to them. Is that what I get by that?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair, yes, that would be my understanding as well.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. And Councillor Zelka, I apologize. I managed to skip over you in my notes here. So back to you for your questions.
As long as I have a chance to speak, that's good enough. Thank you so much, Chair. So I've got a number of questions. I'll sort of just scattergun them a little bit as I seek to understand this a little bit more. So let me start a few questions to staff. If I recall correctly, in previous mandates of Oak Bay Council, we had the Parks, Rec and Culture Commission. And I recall the commission did some work on the pickleball work in terms of some aspects of public engagement. Again, my memory may be faulty, but I have a feeling that this sport at least came up around that time. So this, since we don't have the commission anymore, first question through you to staff is, might this not be appropriate to bring this to like a Parks and Rec committee? And if we don't have a committee, what's the status of that at this moment in time, please?
Sure, that's a question more for Ms. Williams, I think, in terms of the timelines for bringing back options on new committees and commissions. Ms. Williams, do we have a timeline for when options are going to be coming back?
For the Parks Rec Committee.
For the Parks Rec and Parks and Rec Committee potential.
Hi, Your Worship. My apologies for the delay. We don't have a timeline at this point. The direction that we're following at this point is to focus on the committees that have been established.
Okay, so we can't refer it. If we were just, realistic timelines, even if we gave that direction to form one, it would take a few months to get it set up and do the advertising and so forth. So yeah, well, it's at our table for now.
I appreciate the opportunity to at least ask about that, since I understood it was going to be worked on after we had all of our committees and commissions in place. So I'm seeing, hopefully it'll be in the hopper soon. So regarding some of those pickleball block booking dollar figures that Mr. Meikle provided, the $8,000 or $9,000 for pickleball and the $13,000 to $14,000 for tennis, was that only for Carnarvon Park, or was that for all outdoor courts combined, please?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. For pickleball, it is just Carnarvon. Those are the only outdoor courts we have that are reservable. For tennis, it is primarily Henderson Park. Last year for tennis, we did take a few. Last year in the pandemic year, we did take some block booking at Windsor, but that generally hasn't been the trend in the past. So it's been Henderson for tennis and Carnarvon for pickleball.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. In your report, you're suggesting certain gates be locked at 6 p.m. Would that also lock out any tennis users? Are you anticipating? Because I know tennis users also use those courts late after 6 p.m. And were you anticipating everyone being locked out from 6 p.m. on if we follow your suggestion?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, through the chair to Councillor Zelka. Unfortunately, the infrastructure there would mean that all the courts would be locked, so it would impact both tennis and pickleball players at that time.
Okay, thank you. Just a sort of again pragmatic questions I'm asking here. Would it be possible to consider taking off the nets? And then maybe putting them back on the next morning. Is that something which is doable without too much difficulty by an attendant instead of locking the gates, for example?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair to Councillor Zelka. I imagine it is doable. It is more time consuming and would have some staff resources attached to that. At this point, the plan would be to have the parks patrol that goes and locks the washrooms at that point, simply lock the gates to the court area. Taking off the nets and putting on the nets again, I would have to come back to council here with some specific numbers of time, but that it does take a significant longer time. There are 4 nets. I think there's also the thought that many players have their own portable nets, and so could certainly come and set up their own portable nets and begin playing after that time, even if the nets were taken off, for example. So that has a risk attached to it as well.
Okay, so a couple more questions related to that then. I couldn't quite tell from your report whether there was like what's happening after 6 p.m. Is the problem just between 4 and 6 where the wrong types of balls are being used, or is there an extensive noise after 6 p.m.? I've been by Carnarvon Park a couple of times at 6 p.m. and beyond, and I didn't notice very many pickleball users. I saw a lot of tennis users more recently with the great weather we're having. But so could you give me a better idea of what is it that we're trying to stop and what we're trying to enforce here, please?
Sure, Mr. Meikle?
Sure, thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. It is about the pickleball play. Now, granted, as I had mentioned earlier, what we've seen through the block booking process for pickleball is the greater demand does lie in the daytime. So we are trying to find some balance between the usage and targeting when the higher usage is on the courts versus providing some respite, if you like, for the neighbors at times when they would more likely be using their patios or backyards for their own family time. At that point, there is pickleball usage in the evenings, is my understanding. Now we've asked for foam ball usage after 4 p.m. and we're recommending a 6 p.m. locking time, partly just in coordination with that Parks Patrol that I had mentioned, but also to give at least some opportunity for those at that early evening time to have an opportunity to play and then allow for some of that respite. So really just trying to find a balance of needs there and providing those opportunities as best as possible.
Okay, very much appreciate that input. Thank you so much. So just a few more quick questions. Again, the practicalities and the pragmatics of this. Is there any sort of a possible CARSA or UVic? UVic has, of course, that wonderful athletic facility called CARSA. And I imagine with certainly during the pandemic times when we have so many people at home, that there's all these wonderful facilities over there at UVic that may not get quite the full usage, I'm guessing, because there's not as many students around during the pandemic times. Is it possible for, or has Parks and Rec and Culture staff considered a possible CARSA UVic collaboration as a way of possibly shifting maybe some of this over into a UVic type collaboration piece?
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, through the chair. Yes, we have considered and looked at some options of partnering with UVic, more actually focused on there's some outdoor tennis courts at the Ian Stewart complex, just on Gordon Head Road or the corner, basically corner of Gordon Head and Mackenzie there.
Yes.
And so that's an option. UVic again has their own restrictions around. Well, they're dealing with the same pandemic restrictions that we're all dealing with. So there's some hesitancy in particular to open the doors to the public in general. And right now we're still operating under everything has to be pre-registered to come into our facilities. Everyone has to be pre-registered. So there's certainly some hesitancy, and they're there to provide services to their students first and foremost. And there are still students on campus. There's still students living in dorms, et cetera. And so I think that's the message at this point, was that was their priority, and we may come back to look at some options into the future. But again, we had really only been focused on those outdoor courts over towards the Ian Stewart complex.
Oh, great. Well, okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for that information. One last question, if I may. I do note that there is the Lawn Bowling Association just down the way over in Carnarvon Park. They seem to police their noise and their boisterous parties that no doubt they have, yet we don't hear too many complaints of noise of them. And the Kiwanis Water Park, of course, unfortunately is closed, but even when it was open, the delightful squeal of children can be annoying. I'm a father, I do sometimes would like to have a little bit of quietness, and yet that noise does get to be to some extent controlled. I note for pickleball in particular, there is the Victoria Regional Pickleball Association, and I did notice a letter that came in. Unfortunately, the letter was sent directly to councillors, and they're actually offering assistance. Has Parks, Rec and Culture reached out possibly to that association to see if there was some way that, I don't know, maybe some sort of collaboration could be brought forward where possibly all bookings could be done through that organization? Maybe.
Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. We are in contact with and have been in contact with the Victoria Regional Pickleball Association, more along the lines of the longer term approach of trying to find future courts and what future courts could look like in not only in Oak Bay, but in the region as a whole. My understanding is that they're generally not in the business, so to speak, of booking courts themselves and of monitoring and policing courts themselves. So we haven't broached that subject with them. We can certainly have that conversation, but I'm not sure they're resourced to provide that option either. So that would be a conversation that would need to happen.
Well, for me, I would just muse out loud that volunteers run the world. Without volunteers, the world would fall apart. It would cost way too much money. So I just wonder out loud whether something might be possible there. The last point I'll make before I release my questions, at least, I do notice, relying on science, I'm a bit of a scientist here, sound levels decrease by the doubling of the distance. And we are talking about possibly relocating these 4 courts, pick them up, and in the 5 to 6 years from now, if all goes well, moving them into the lacrosse court area, or maybe even sooner. Might it be possible to just simply shut down 2 of the 4 courts, say at 6 p.m., find a way to put a chain across or some way of disabling 2 of those 4 courts so that the 2 courts that are closest to the lacrosse could stay open, but the 2 that are closest to the private lands could be closed off? And we would, through the science, be able to reduce the impact of sound levels and the subjective aspect of loudness.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. the way the courts are structured, so 4 pickleball courts fit on 1 tennis court essentially. And so taking out those first 2 tennis courts really only buys you about probably 50 feet. So it's not a great deal of distance. I don't know that would have the impact that that neighbors might be seeking. We could certainly take a look at some experiments there, so to speak, and do some measuring. But when you're moving them into the lacrosse box, we're now hundreds of feet of additional space there between the courts. So certainly, as you say, makes a greater difference.
Well, thank you so much. We're all looking for compromise in this crazy pandemic time. We do have at this moment. Everyone on council at least is familiar with, how do I put this, familiar with the ministerial order 195, excuse me, 190, where's the number? I just had it right here. Ministerial order 192, which is allowing us to meet in this way. But there's also ministerial order, I think it's 82. Oh gosh, where did I have it now? I just had it open a second ago. And now I can't find it. But then the ministerial order that basically, how do I say it? Any noise bylaws across the province of British Columbia that in any ways outlaws delivery of for example, food or supplies at all hours of the day or night. The province has allowed that noise to be made at any time during the day or night so that supplies can be delivered. Transport trucks trundling down the small roads of Oak Bay are now legal at 2 a.m. According to a ministerial order, I think it's 82. So, this is unusual time. So looking for some compromise both on our side and on the side of the public, I think will bode us all well. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Back to
Yes, Councilor Zelka. Thank you to everybody for their questions. I have just one question on this, and to Mr. Meikle, just I'm wondering if there's been any thought given to the possibility of using, I guess, like some organizational thing or setting up our own organizational models for a pickleball league type approach, where to be part of the league you use the foam balls and it's scheduled. I just recall similar sports league I participated in Vancouver, where you just, as a website, you log in, you pay a nominal fee of $50 or $100 a year, and you're part of that, and they put you together if you don't have a partner, and you put in your skill levels, and it manages the time for you. And using something like that to actually in that sort of evening time period to allow us some control. So that's part of the conditions of playing there would be those either the paddles and balls, or just the balls that are the lower noise. Has that been contemplated in any way, shape, or form, Mr. Meikle?
Thank you, Your Worship. We do run pickleball programs, and from lessons and to helping people learn the game, and have run some tournaments, etc. in the past. It certainly is possible as an option. I would probably recommend again in this case that we would bring forward a staff report. Off the top, my fears or concerns around that one would be that, given the resistance we're already seeing around using the foam balls, we may not get the participation levels that would be required to sort of maintain or sustain a league over the long term, and or to maintain control over the court usage for 7 nights a week, for example. Offering a league with the equipment usage that the pickleball players have expressly stated they're not fond of does have some inherent risks attached to it. So, but again, certainly a possibility, and I think the idea of programming that space to bring some control to it has some possibilities and could be considered in a future staff report.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, having everybody given a chance to ask questions, we have a number of speakers who have registered to speak this evening. So why don't I go to those, and I'm just going to, what I'll do is I'll call all 4 names that have registered in the order that we received them. And if you're calling in, if you're watching and you want to call in, the number is now on your screen. You just dial in that number and hit *9 to raise your hand. The first, the names that I have are Mr. Leach, Ms. McCann, Mr. Stead, and Mr. Lee. So first up, we have Mr. David Leach. If you're here, you are on Zoom, so I see you there. We usually give people about 3 minutes each, but there's no firm line on this one. If you have, you're more than welcome to address council. So with that, welcome, Mr. Leach.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to get feedback. I've been an Oak Bay resident since '89, homeowner since 2004, and since we've got 2 kids as well, our family spent a lot of time in this park at Paddington Station, the water park, playing soccer. I've got my coach's gear on here, so I'm out there 3 nights a week, and my son got hooked on tennis playing in the courts. So I really care about this park, but unfortunately, I really find that the specifics of the motion to restrict access to pickleball and tennis in the evenings, basically a 7-layer tiramisu cake of absurdity. It would be absurd to restrict access to outdoor recreation in a pandemic when so many people are kind of suffering real kind of physical and mental health issues. To penalize tennis players in particular, especially the working families who use the courts after 6, because again of just a few bad apples amongst the pickleball players, especially when the report says the pickleball players will actually be less affected because they're mostly retired and can come earlier in the day. It's just a form of collective punishment. It's, I think, a bit absurd for the report to say that the tennis courts aren't well used and then not supply anything more than anecdotal evidence. I think if you want to make an evidence-based decision, I encourage you to refer back to the public consultation, extensive, for the Carnarvon Park Master Plan. And then more than 90% of people agreed or strongly agreed with almost every element except for the reduction of tennis courts in that master plan where it couldn't beat the 50% threshold for agreement. It's a bit absurd for me not to point out that I think Oak Bay Rec is actually in a financial conflict of interest in this motion. They generate revenue from renting out outdoor and indoor courts that might increase by limiting access to the largely free courts. I think that would be short-term gain, long-term loss. My son got hooked on playing tennis on these courts, and since then he's done a ton of tennis camps and plays tennis lessons regularly at Oak Bay Rec. The Carnarvon courts are far more accessible by bike or walking, and also far more welcoming to youth players than Windsor and Henderson. So these are the future of the game. Finally, the notion it seems especially absurd because it's not actually what the neighbors want. On the Oak Bay local Facebook page, I complained about things. That's where we all complain about things. And one of the neighbors jumped on and said, their issue is entirely about pickleball after 4 p.m. She said she had given foam balls. She says that she's requested, put in another fence so only the pickleball court can be locked off. This motion makes it seem that they don't want any racket sports at all, which simply isn't true. And finally, I think it's absurd that Oak Bay made the mistake of first putting pickleball courts next to the residences, and only after, as I now understand it, that pickleballers went in and weighted down nets and added lines. If they were teenagers, that would be called vandalism and graffiti. Nevertheless, when there's spots at Windsor and Henderson still available, and now they want to double down and punish, again, the younger cohort of tennis players, again, in the middle of the pandemic. This motion just sends a message to working families like my own who rely on outdoor recreation opportunities, but our needs are not as valued as those in other members of our community, and that just makes me sad. So I just encourage you all to vote against this motion, to vote instead for ones like the neighbors and longtime users, or even that some of your councillors have suggested as more meaningful compromises. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. And thank you for your comments. There's a report here that sort of tries to highlight the pros and cons. The motion there's 5 alternates, and the first one is there. So I don't want any measure here that this is the only way option forward. The whole point of the meeting this evening is for us to have a civilized and debate. So we should weigh the pros and cons of the different approaches. So there was nothing wrong in what was said there, but perhaps just a tone of things being absurd. We're just trying to look at all the options. And if people don't feel like they are free to provide alternates or ideas, then we're not going to have a full discussion. So let's just keep that. That's fine. But just going forward, we're just going to ask people to just keep an open mind and bring forward your positive ideas. Next up, I have Ms. McCann.
Yes, Mayor, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Can you? I had somebody say my microphone was muffled a bit when I moved it before. Is it clearer now? It is?
Yes.
Okay, getting thumbs up. Good.
Yes.
Go ahead, Ms.
Okay.
McCann.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Connie McCann. I live at 1178 Beach Drive, and I'm 69 years of age, and I'm a pickleball player, and I play at Carnarvon Park. I'm a member of the Victoria Regional Pickleball Association, and I'm a member of Pickleball BC. And I play during the day, but I would like to have the option, especially in the summer, to play after 6 o'clock at night. But 90 to 99% of the time, I'm playing during the day. And I'm one of those people who pays money to block book to get time to play right now, singles or with another couple. So my husband and I are on one side of the court and the other couple are on the other side. But later, when we're able, we have a group, and over 60% of the people in that group are from Oak Bay. I'm asking you to keep the public courts open, not locked. I want you to uphold your official community plan goal, which is to support citizens to be active and healthy. Pickleball players in Oak Bay are underserved. The courts are heavily used and they're vital during the COVID years when outdoor is our safe space. And I just want to point out, because some of the councillors asked about the revenue that pickleball brings forward, that of the total land area devoted to tennis and pickleball, less than 10% of the land area is devoted to pickleball. 4 pickleball courts take up 1 tennis court. And we're generating 50% of the revenues of tennis. So in terms of equity, not a very well-served sport, but it certainly is a well-participated sport and it is growing. So Expedient Solutions, which is the recommended direction, to me will breed resentment. I'm asking you to seek the right solution, and that may take direction to staff, which I've been hearing, which I'm pleased, and it could mean changing priorities, and it definitely will mean some budget implications. I want you to seek the balance to support recreation play, and I want you to move towards solving the noise irritation issues in that neighborhood. It is not comfortable playing in a court where you feel you are not welcome, and I can attest to that one. I think the balance is worth striving for, but the good news is there are solutions. There are cheap 1-star solutions, and there actually are some very enticing 5-star, very expensive solutions. And I've been hearing some of that as I listened in here. And I would just point out that you can take 1 tennis court up at Henderson, and you can re-market for 4 pickleball courts, like without very much money. But my tennis friends would actually take me out and behead me for that suggestion. And I'm actually not in support of remarking tennis courts. You could take part of the parking lot at Henderson, take some paved area that is used for cars. I know sometimes that is a difficult decision, but it could be a good one. And resurface for pickleball courts. Again, that probably has some budget considerations to it. Expensive solution, but it will reduce the noise, is the highway sound walls. Now, that has definite budget implications, and it is a big solid wall to look at. So I'm asking you to take some time to work out a direction to staff and have the staff think outside the box and get creative on this, as some of you have at the table. I would even suggest that you can actually reallocate $150,000 from the 2021 budget for parking lot repaving, which I'm quite sure is there, to immediately use to repave up at Henderson parking lot for pickleball courts. But that takes a change in priorities, but it is doable. So please hold the line on supporting recreational play in public parks, and please do some direction to staff to seek every imaginable solution and bring forward a report within 100 days, and if required, reallocate budget items or target the 2022 budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCann. I have next up Stephen Stead or Steed, and then Doug Lee. Is Mr. Stead, I hope I pronounced that right, available?
Hello, Your Worship. Mr. Stead hasn't joined the meeting at this time.
Okay, if he's dialed in, he would hit *9 to raise his hand, but there's no dial-in callers at this point.
Not at this point, Your Worship. He did
Okay.
indicate that he may not call in to speak. He may just listen from home.
Okay, that is fine. If Mr. Stead, if you're watching and wish to call in, you can call in or join us on the Zoom call. Mr. Lee, welcome.
Hi.
Hello,
hear
and
me?
welcome. We can.
Yeah, my name's Doug Lee. I'm a lifetime resident of Oak Bay and lived beside Carnarvon Park for 17 years. Generally it's been fine. We live near the water park, but that's okay. It was there before we moved in here, and the tennis is fine too, but take great exception to the fact that pickleball was put in without any consultation with the residents. And I would echo Caller McCann's suggestion to move pickleball to Henderson. I think either Henderson or Windsor is the place to move it. And I don't see any resolution to the noise problem unless you would make a rule here saying nothing but foam balls. The rules right now are ridiculously complicated, and I'm not surprised that the pickleballers don't follow them. And as the idea of moving it to the lacrosse box, we're talking about 20 to 30 feet further away from where they are now. The lacrosse box is just the width of a driveway away from where the existing pickleball courts are now. So I don't see that doing much of anything for the noise, and I would suggest that's not cost effective. The first fellow, I agree with him that tennis is very popular at Carnarvon Park, and the biggest drawback of the master plan was that you were going to reduce the number of tennis courts in Carnarvon and increase pickleball. Based on my years of observations, tennis is still by far more popular at Carnarvon than pickleball, and you have a greater range of ages playing and a greater throughout the days of the week. And there's a small group of pickleballers who play generally on Thursdays, and so if you're trying to provide activities for the greatest number of people, it's tennis, not pickleball at Carnarvon Park. Yeah, so like I said, I think the master plan needs to be revisited. Generally, Carnarvon Park works very well, and you don't need to spend $8 or $10 million on changing all of it. You just need, well, probably the lacrosse box and the existing change room building. Those are the two things that need to be redone, replaced. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Lee, can I ask one quick question since you've been there? Can you explain to me or us the difference in noise between the foam balls and the hard plastic balls? Is it substantial?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the foam balls, you don't hear them at all. It's with the hard balls, it's not, it's the thwack noise. It's not, a general high level of noise. It's just this penetrating thwack noise, which you can hear even with all the windows in your house closed. So, it's mildly annoying inside the house, and if they're, you don't want to be outside in your yard if they're playing a lot of pickleball.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, is Mr. Stead called in, and or is there anybody else who has called into the meeting and raised their hand asking to speak?
Hello, Your Worship. No, Mr. Stead has not called in, and we don't have anyone waiting to speak at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So kind of come back to our committee here for a conversation. And Councillor Ney, you have your hand up. Go ahead. You're muted. You're currently muted, Councillor Ney.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, that's it's been helpful hearing comments from staff and the public and our councils. For me, when I play pickleball, I'm not bothered by the sound. But if I had to sit around listening to pickleball noise all day on my personal property, that would be an irritant. There's something about that noise. So I really do concede to that. The foam ball option, that doesn't work. It's like using a feather to play darts. It just really doesn't work. So, but what I would like to see here is that I'm not confident that we've fully explored ways to mitigate the noise without taking away access to the tennis courts. And I mean, I really do not support the idea of closing recreation playing on public parks at all. That really bothers me. And I would really like to know we have fully exhausted every possibility, whether it's expedient or more efficient or costly, of finding a way to mitigate the noise for the neighbors on those courts without closing the courts to the tennis courts for sure, and possibly continued use for pickleball users. So that's the short-term piece. The longer-term piece, I really think that, I mean, it's so obvious that pickleball playing is a growing recreational sport, going very, very fast. I was on the courts when it was Friday night. There were about 13 young people, well, young, I mean, between 30 and 40. 2 of them were good, experienced pickleball players, and the rest were newcomers. And they were teaching us, and they were having an absolute hoot. And the novices were just so impressed with how fun it was and how easy it was to take up. I mean, this is just a growing sport. And I think we need to look at some longer term solutions. Staff has talked about the lacrosse box. I would be interested in hearing from staff a more detailed report around the feasibility, the costs, the timelines, and also ways to mitigate sound using the boards that could be extended up around soundproofing. It would seem to me, though I'm no expert, I'd like to hear from the staff or engineers about how you could both accommodate more courts there. That was the plan for the Carnarvon master plan. So this would be kind of a practice run to see if that would work. I heard the number 50,000 bandied about. That obviously would need to be confirmed. But if we could get another 4 to 6 courts, if we could mute the sound somewhat with barriers around the perimeter of that lacrosse box, I would be interested that could be done and get done fairly quickly as well. So those are my thoughts. I'll be interested to hear from the other councillors.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ney. I have Councillor Braithwaite and Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would agree with the bulk of Councillor Nay's comments. I'm not sure about the foam ball because I've never played pickleball with a foam ball before, so I can't speak to that. I wish that that had been more embraced with the pickleball players, because perhaps then we wouldn't be in this position. But I agree that I can't support locking the courts at this time, especially during a pandemic. There's a couple of things that came up in the conversation, which I thought was very interesting. One was something that Ms. McCann said, and someone had called me on the weekend to talk to me about the pickleball courts, and they had suggested this as well, and that is that the area around Henderson parking lot. And I thought that was a really good suggestion. So that might be something that I think that perhaps if staff could look into something like that, that would be great. And also the other thing that I thought about was, if we didn't, it would be nice to give the residents around Carnarvon some respite. So whether or not it's from using noise mitigation, the foam balls or something like that, or even if we close the courts 2 nights a week, as opposed to 7 nights a week, something like that. I mean, maybe that would give enough of a respite to the residents that it would help. And if the courts aren't utilized all of those nights every week, and Mr. Meikle, I think, said that something around if we took over forming a club or whatever it was for pickleball play, that he doesn't think we could fill it for 7 nights a week. Well, then maybe we only open it up for 5 nights a week and have the courts closed 2 nights a week. And that would be a little bit more of a balance, a little bit more of a compromise. So yeah, I'll be interested to hear what everybody else has to say, but where I'm standing right now is I would like to get a little bit more information from staff in regards to noise mitigation, other locations in the near future that we could perhaps look at putting a pickleball court on. I think it was also Ms. McCann who talked about how 60% of the players are from Oak Bay, which is great. And then also 50% of the dollars are coming from 10% of the space. And I thought that was really interesting as well, that pickleball only takes up 10% of the land space that tennis does, and yet brings in 50% of the dollars. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind as well. And that shows how popular pickleball is. And one day, perhaps I'll learn how to play pickleball rather than tennis. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I had Councillor Green and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks again to Mr. Meikle for both his report and his answers to the many questions that we had tonight. I'm aligned with previous speakers. I cannot support closure of a park, and closure that would include, a tennis court. I just don't think it's good public policy. I think it sets a precedent that I would not like to see. While I sympathize with the neighbors, I think, again, like others, that we should be looking for creative solutions to some of the noise issues. Relocation, acoustic mitigations, and the conversion of parking lots. We have a number of public parking lots around the municipality, and it would be worth exploring both their location and adjacent neighbors and see if there are other options. But in the meantime, I would agree with, I think Councillor Ney mentioned, the master plan is a wonderful document, but if it's 5 or 6 years out, that will not solve the immediate situation. And again, this is all occurring in the context of pandemic. And given that there is no end date in sight at the moment to the pandemic, I think we really need to support our recreational activities, particularly outdoors. So I would agree with my colleagues. I would like to hear from staff on some more creative ideas, and each of them having a budget attached so that we have some idea what we're looking at financially. But, I think over the long term, even a short-term financial fix would be a good investment in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Zilka.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the comments by my fellow councillors so far, and I think generally I agree with them. I will perhaps come at it a little differently because I've heard comments about all of the health references to keeping the courts open. I appreciate that. It's very important that particularly during pandemic, that residents are able to get out and be able to indulge in whatever activities that they like to outdoors, to stay healthy and to make life a little easier during these times. But I also found it quite interesting how this has evolved in that the pickleball courts did evolve due to popularity. And mankind is generally very creative when they want to be, but that meant that the residents really didn't ever have a voice in the matter. And health also refers to the residents who live close to that park and are entitled to some respite from the noise of the pickleball. And I've been there a variety of times, and I think I would, I think it was Councillor Ney that said she would have difficulty being close to it if she wasn't involved in playing pickleball. I certainly know that I would. It's obvious that people are having an enjoyable time playing the game. However, the use of the courts through extended hours, I think could be trying on the nerves of people who are being expected to work from home, provide education sometimes from home for their children, and still try to find some peaceful time in their home during these difficult times. So I think that is really important, and I feel concerned that it involved, the evolution of pickleball did not involve any engagement with the public at the time. I support what my other council members have said around the table, that we need more information from staff, but I will go beyond that because some of the problems associated with pickleball are fairly specialized. The acoustical knowledge is necessary to, I think, have a full understanding of what we could potentially achieve or not, because I don't think we want to just move the situation. So I think that any staff reporting they would need to also have the encouragement to engage with an acoustical consultant who could provide advice and the professional expertise to vet whatever location staff might consider as options to relocate pickleball either within the Carnarvon or at a different location. And I don't think we should get, budgets are important. And, as the council member who is always talking about budgets, this will perhaps astound some people, but I don't think we should be bound by them totally, that there are other options. And hopefully Mr. Payne is not listening in tonight. So although we may hear from him later, but I think really, certainly during pandemic, we've had the realization really emphasized to us what valuable assets our parks are in Oak Bay. And so if there is an appropriate short-term solution that can work both for the residents and for the players, that would be great. But I think that it is also important that if we needed to consider a different option and it was a bit more costly, I don't think we should be bound just by the financial budgets we have before us, because as we all know, Oak Bay has considerable borrowing capacity. And I think we should really look at this as an investment, not only in our parks that are valuable assets, but in the health of the residents of the community. So I'll leave it at that. But I think this needs to be a little bit more fulsome review. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very much in favor of what I'm hearing around the council table. For a number of reasons, I can't support locking the gates to a public park. The Premier, the Provincial Health Officer, just announced today that effectively, the island health authorities are going to become sort of like bubbles unto themselves, where we're not being encouraged to travel outside of our local health authority area. As a way of controlling, trying to get a measure of control over this third wave of the pandemic, which will only put more pressure, and rightly so, on our local parks. So this is not the time to be shutting down the parks or reducing their usage for all sorts of reasons, including mental health of our citizens. So I can't support option 1 as mentioned in the report, although options 2, 3, and 4 have aspects to it that I'm very interested in. They do talk about more longer term aspects, although I'm intrigued with Councillor Patterson's suggestion to possibly borrow money to see if we could expedite some aspect of this, or possibly, through a very quick redo or re-aspect of our financial bylaw to possibly reallocate some funds to, and I'm also quite intrigued, with potentially setting up pickleball courts on a corner of the Henderson parking lot, maybe closest to the tennis courts, to possibly help take advantage of some of the lighting or something else, since they're fairly far away from most residences. Although I understand there is some residents that are closer to there. We'll have to see. It'll take a little bit of analysis to see who might or might not be affected if we do put pickleball courts in the area of the Henderson parking lot area. I'm also intrigued with seeing what we could do to try and move forward with putting pickleball courts, moving them into the lacrosse area sooner instead of later, with some sound attenuation. So I'm definitely in alignment, and I have a sense, a bit of a consensus is starting to form. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Yes, I'll just reiterate what I've been sort of hearing consensus on is a desire to keep these facilities open as much as possible, recognizing the need for public health and outdoor activities. Also, I think though recognizing that the residents do need some respite from this noise. It's all day, every day is clearly a lot to ask, especially for something that didn't have a public consultation to go in there in the first place. There's also, I'm hearing that there's a support for growth of these courts somewhere, probably at Henderson. There's interesting, at least getting some cost and staff time, et cetera, implications, both of the retrofit of the lacrosse courts, possibly with some sound mitigation involved, and what would the cost be of either the parking lot and or some other site at Henderson as well. And those could be looked at in the short or long term. I'm also cognizant of the fact that hasn't come up tonight, but the Windsor tennis courts are being resurfaced in the next month or so. So if you're interested in that, that might be a timely thing to actually see if there's something we could do to use that team to expand. It's probably not too likely, but it's possible. So that's what I've heard so far. And I think that would probably have some support from the body here, but go ahead, Councillor Ney. I see your hand up now. Councillor
No, I just wanted to thank you for that summary, Mr. Mayor. From my perspective, I agree with most of what you said, looking for some alternate courts to expand the pickleball usage in the municipality was something that I was certainly in agreement. I had my mind on the lacrosse box, but Henderson would be okay, but not at the expense of taking away other tennis courts. That's just what I want to clarify. If there were some places where we could find some pocket spaces throughout the municipality here and there, like I've noticed happens in various parts of Victoria for pickleball. That would be something that would be interesting. But I think the bottom line is what you're speaking to, Mr. Mayor, is that we give that to staff to come up with some options about alternatives and costs. Obviously, the conflict issue has to be a consideration wherever the location is. Thank you.
Sorry, and I didn't mention it. I had it in my notes, mentioned by Councillor Braithwaite, and I think probably if we're looking for some respite, something like asking for a couple of nights off in a week, probably just with signage as opposed to locking the gate, would probably be one option that we might consider in the short term as well. I said Councillor Appleton's hand, and then Councillor Zelka's.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm in concurrence with much of what I've heard here tonight. So I would like to put a motion forward, and we'll see whether I can get support for that motion and try to capture some of what I've heard and some of what I feel to be true. I feel that the best short-term, I too am not in favor of closing the existing courts. I feel the best short-term option is to evaluate, the quickest win is to evaluate the repurposing of the existing lacrosse box at Carnarvon, combined with some other measures to help address the issue and to do it on a fairly tight timeline. So if it's in order, Your Worship, I can make a motion to that effect.
Sure. Could you read the motion more formally as to what you wish to move forward, just so we have a clear motion to speak to?
Absolutely, Your Worship. So I would move that staff be directed to report back to council with cost and timeline options to temporarily relocate the pickleball courts at Carnarvon to the existing lacrosse box area, and seeking to accomplish that on a 1-year timeline. And also that staff's analysis include options for structural noise reduction measures.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Moved and seconded. You've kind of spoken to it, Councillor Appleton, but if do you wish to speak any more to that motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, what I'm trying to capture here is that with the understanding that, as I say, I personally am not in support of closing the existing courts at this time, to try to develop options on an expedient basis. What I've heard is that there is the structural possibility of repurposing the lacrosse box, that it does afford some extra space and a buffer between adjacent properties, and that it may have the structural opportunity, just because of the way that it's built and designed, to incorporate some noise attenuation measures, fencing, or something of that nature around the outside of it to help do that. But I want to be clear, the reason that I've included the goal of getting this done on a 1-year timeline is to try to respect the fact that the neighbors do need to see some respite, and they, with speaking to, as has been referenced a couple of times here, there was not an original public consultation process put in place with this. So I would like to be able to take action and action this on a fairly expedient timeline, just with respect of that idea. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I had the hands up before the motion was made, but I'll still keep that same order if that's okay. Councillor Zelka, then Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was well, I will support the motion. I was certainly hoping for maybe a slightly freer hand if staff did have an opportunity to possibly also provide some input on maybe alternate locations, such as the parking lot near Henderson. This motion doesn't necessarily exclude that, but it also doesn't mention it. So I was hoping that would have been included, but I'll certainly still support this. So this suggests a 1-year timeline. In the interim, I know that there may still be some, especially over the summertime, especially as people are not allowed to travel far. I certainly want to support our staff and support our citizens in the quiet enjoyment of the properties, and at the same time, very much enjoyment of the parks. So I would hope that staff maybe on a more expedited basis might be able to come back with some suggestions of either powers we can provide or suggestions of some other, I don't want to say enforcement mechanisms. Maybe there's some way of working more directly with the Victoria Regional Pickleball Association in a much more formal way to assist with this mitigation of effects. So I'm speaking around the motion. I certainly want to support staff. If we had that committee in place, I would definitely throw a suggestion like that at the committee. So I don't know what to do with those sort of suggestions right now until the committee's in place. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Zelka, this is the table that we're having the discussion, so we can give direction to staff to come back with information. So
Yes.
if that's something you wish to do, we can certainly deal with multiple motions on this. It's better to consider everything at the same time. So I'll allow for a discussion around things that may be other options as well. But if we wish to deal with this motion, and if other motions arising, people wanted to also look at this is a sort of short, medium term motion,
Yes.
I would say. So I would suggest that these are appropriate for that. These are actions for staff looking at specifics to the lacrosse box, but
so
we can
one
take
thing at a
additional
time.
motions.
We'll stay with the lacrosse box at least for now. If another councillor wishes to extend the motion, I would support that as well. But for now, we'll just stay with this.
Sure, and I won't close off options for additional motions after this one is dealt with as well. So,
Thanks.
Councillor Braithwaite, the name.
Thank you. I actually agree with Councillor Zelka. I was hoping that we wouldn't necessarily focus in on the lacrosse box. And I think it was Mr. Lee that said the lacrosse box is actually only an additional 50 feet away from where the current court is. So I'm not sure noise-wise how that would affect the residents as well. So I was hoping that perhaps we could get staff to come back with a report on, maybe what it would look like to have it at the lacrosse box and what it might take, or what it would look like to have it at Henderson or another place like that. I also would like to, as Councillor Zelka mentioned as well, there's other things that I would like to see. One of the things would be that we could perhaps have staff come back to us with information on which are the busiest nights of the pickleball, and so that we could perhaps close off the courts, or not close off the courts, but ask no players to be there on certain nights, so that there would be some respite for the residents in the short term until something is made that we can move the pickleball players to. So I'm wanting to support the motion as it is, but I would have liked to have seen it a little bit more fulsome, I guess.
So here's a simple solution for that, just to allow us to move forward reasonably quickly. Why don't, if there's additional items that people wish, why don't we take amending motions to add something specific, and I want it to be specific. As long as it's moved and seconded, I will then split this motion into each of those component parts, and we can vote on each of them individually. So if there's right now we have options for the lacrosse box this year, noise mitigations for the lacrosse box. If you want to add, or any member wants to add a motion to something like, no pickleball on certain days of the week, or other reports back on those as well, we'll add those. Then we'll just vote on them one by one, so that we can sort of expeditely go through this, but we can consider the whole.
So you want me to do an amendment right now?
Yeah, an amendment to add things would be the appropriate piece. Yeah.
So I would like to make an amendment to add that staff come back to us with a report on which nights perhaps we could have no pickleball being played on the courts, the courts that are there right now. And that staff would come back with some information on the costing of an alternate location for the pickleball courts, i.e. Henderson parking lot.
I'll just say, how about around the Henderson rec center?
Around the Henderson, yeah.
Sure.
So could we just deal with the first motion first? So I'm just going to take them individually to add them if people are willing. So the first motion, I think that needs a bit of cleaning up the wording, if you don't mind. Braithwaite. Perhaps just some wording that the staff come back with options for pickle-free days, pickleball-free evenings, 1 or 2 nights a week, and just leave it at that generally, and they can come back with what possibilities might
Probably in
might come
terms of
back.
usage.
Okay.
Yeah.
For usage. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so is there a
Second.
seconder for that? Okay, so that's
Second.
moved and seconded as well. And then the third one was just to bring back options for additional pickleball courts at Henderson, not on the tennis courts, but just additional.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is
Second.
there a seconder for that? Okay, so those are now, I have 4 different options on pieces in front of us. Sorry,
And
just for a second, see. I just want to make sure I don't forget anything. So just give me a second here while I write these down. Okay, go ahead.
I think that one of the reasons that I would like to see other locations looked at is that the Carnarvon Master Plan is actually, I mean, even though we have the master plan, there's still certain aspects of it that I don't think are totally clear yet. And so to put a pickleball court in the location that's being suggested, it might be a little bit premature. And I'm not sure if I want to spend the dollars on doing that now, when in 3 years, perhaps we might go, whoops, we should have had this moved by 10 or 15 feet. And so that's really why I'm not really wanting the pickleball court at the lacrosse box right now. I'm just thinking that it limits us for the future.
Okay, I think those limitations would come back with that report for clarity. So I think the report request is real valid. I have Councillor Ney and then Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, I don't, the only issue I have with the amendment regarding the days off is rather than give staff the solution to providing noise relief to the residents, I'd rather keep it more open to make the objective to mitigate noise and leave it for staff to come up with ideas and options and creative choices here, of which days off may be one. But the reason I'm having troubles agreeing to days off is because we're now back at the place of closing down park time, where there may be options still. We can have pickleball users use that park still, but mitigate the noise based on suggestions coming from staff. And maybe days off is the only way, but I'd like to leave that for staff to advise us what they've come up with. So, Mr. Mayor, can I make a friendly amendment or to that?
Yes,
or is that too substantially different?
I think it's quite different.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think your I think your point. We have sorry, I was getting a note here. It's correct. I can only take one amendment and then and then that's we have to deal with the motion. So my idea of doing this motion thing is a little bit awkward, but I'll take other ideas and we can just take additional motions as we go. But I think they're better to have them all on the table right now. So we're thinking about all the potential options.
And then my second point is I do agree. I would like to hear from staff about the option at the lacrosse, but I'm also open to hearing from staff other options. So I agree with that part of the amendment. That makes sense to me, to get all the cards on the table to make an informed decision.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to ask. We have a mover and a seconder to make to amend it to include the pickleball free nights and the Henderson court options. I'm going to actually call the question on those, just to not to approve them, but to approve the amendments. Then we have an amended motion that we can then make amendments to. So if you guys don't mind my little bit of procedural gerrymandering here, if I can call the question on the amendments to those two amendments. That's not to approve them. It's just to include them in the main motion, and then I'll separate those pieces as we do the voting as we go forward,
Provide
which
the
is my
question.
purview.
Just your worship, just one thing. Ms. Williams has her hand up, and I'm not sure if she would be adding something in before you want to call the question.
That is totally legitimate. Ms. Williams, I just saw your text pop up on my screen here as well. So you,
My
ahead.
apologies, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify that your motion can be amended numerous times, but each amending motion needs to be addressed before another one is put on the table. And then at the end of the session, you may have a main motion that has several amendments incorporated into the main motion as amended. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's the procedure I'm going to follow now, which is I'm going to call the question on those amendments, and then I then have the option of dividing the question into those components when I call the question. So I'll just procedurally, that seems the simplest, and it doesn't limit us in the number of amendments. Is that fair?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Williams. So if people are amenable to my process, Councillor Patterson, did you want to speak to the process and go ahead?
Yes, if you could just, as we're going through these, Mayor, if you could just restate the questions so that we are perfectly clear on what we're voting on, because
I will.
There has been quite a bit of commentary, and I think that one of the things that I was concerned about was not included. And so I will listen for that. Thank you.
Okay. So what I'm going to call the question is I'm going to treat Councillor Braithwaite's two comments as two components of one motion, which is to add to the Councillor Appleton's motion, which is options for the lacrosse box and options for noise mitigation. Also options for some free pickleball free evenings for the residents, and options for Henderson Court courts in and around Henderson Rec Center. So the motion that's on the table right now is just to add the options for pickleball nights and the Henderson Court options to the main motion. If that passes, then we can also take more motions to amend. And then what I'll do is I'll go through at the end, and I will call each question in order. I'll use my purview to separate, and we'll just call them one by one so we can have clear debate on each of those individually. I just can't keep amending to each of those in turn, and I think it's worth having all the options clear before we start calling the question. So the motion that is right now is an amendment motion to add those two items. It is not to approve them, it's just to add them to the motion at this point.
A quick question.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. For the one about the pickleball free thing, I understood it also included an aspect of usage for each night. In other words, there's some idea of a usage of each night, which would then help us determine which evenings would be free.
Yes, it's at this point
Okay.
it's very general. Just
Yes. Okay. Good. Excellent.
so with that, I'm going to call the question on the amendment to add these to the main motion. All of those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Patterson, you're opposed? Is that just a late hand? Yes.
I am opposed to the motion as it's put forward. Thank you.
Okay, you opposed to amending it to include those two items, so that's fine. So the record reflect that Councillor Patterson's opposed, but the motion does pass. So we now have an option with 4 asks, and Councillor Patterson, I'm just going to make sure I don't lose Councillor Braithwaite, and then I had Councillor Ney. Anything else, Councillor Ney, that you wish to add before I go on to Councillor Patterson?
Not right now, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, Mayor, as I originally stated in my comments, I think it's really important before we just go on determining locations or whatnot. My preference would have been or alternate location determined by staff, but it really is based on, I believe, the statement that I made about the need to have an acoustical consultant provide advice rather than just staff or council determining locations, because I think that there would be value provided to that. So I would think that, I would amend by at least adding that we enlist the advice of an acoustical consultant to provide us with an impact analysis on sites identified by staff. Thank you.
Well, if you wish to make an amendment, you can do so. We have a motion in front of us that includes essentially four directions to staff at this point. They have not all been passed, and some of them may or may not be passed. But if you wish to add an amendment to also ask staff to include,
Then I would amend it to also include that we direct staff to engage an acoustical consultant to review locations for relocating the pickleball, to understand the impact of those locations.
okay, that's okay. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded, thank you. So you've already spoken to it. Do you want to add anything else? Can I just in terms of wording, I'm just going to go to Mr. Meikle really quickly on this one, because I want to make sure that we don't box ourselves in on this, because an acoustical consultant might be very costly and not have specific knowledge of pickleball noises, which I think is more about the type of sound than the volume. Mr. Meikle, is engaging an acoustical consultant sufficiently broad, if that was to pass, that it would allow you to you've looked at this long enough, you probably have some sense of where to go for advice. Is that sufficiently broad to allow you the requisite width of getting consultants?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. I think so, yes. There obviously would be cost involved in hiring that consultant. I've engaged similar consultants in indoor spaces when we've had to deal with rooms beside each other and having to mitigate sound and having two different activities in rooms beside each other. So I'm speculating that those folks would be able to do similar work for us on an outdoor basis, and so I think it serves the purpose. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Just want that clarification. Is there any other discussion on the motion to add? This is to include directing staff to engage an acoustical consultant. I guess really it should be to bring back options or costing for or options for engaging an acoustical consultant at this point, because we're not directing them to engage it at this point. Is that correct, Councillor Patterson? Okay, thank you. Councillor Braithwaite, you have your hand up. Is that to speak to this amendment? Okay, so just if this passes, it'll then be added to the list of options that we'll consider. So I don't see any other speakers on it. So it's moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. So that will be discussed as well. Is there any other amendments? Councillor Braithwaite, you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Actually, I'm just going back to some of the comments that that Councillor Ney made in regards to the not wanting to limit ourselves to just saying, let's have a couple of nights where we wouldn't have pickleball. Maybe we should have staff look at other ways to mitigate. I'm quite supportive of that. I'm not really locked into only having that one option. So I think that if Councillor Ney wants to go a little bit further on that, that might be something that we could look at.
Yeah, fair enough, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Ney, I'm not sure if there's anything specific. I look at this as staff. I think this is coming to us at this point because staff have essentially exhausted their ability to find solutions within the constraints of where the physical location and the budgets allocated. So I don't know where other options they could look at that aren't going to involve some additional moving and pieces. So I think if any direction to that would be welcome, but I think it probably needs to be a little bit constrained so that they have some direction in terms of where they might.
Well, I guess, are you asking me, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, in my mind, and I am no expert at this, but in my amateur thinking of this is, I'm thinking, what if we had a way, we had a bylaw where you could actually find people so that we get a little bit more stringent around the consequence of non-compliance of using noisy equipment at the court between certain hours, because we haven't really explored that. That's just one option. Another option might, staff, I can probably think of other things other than what I'm able to, but the other idea is around these bats that I've understood mitigates noise. Now, they are more expensive, but that may or may not be a barrier many, but that's not for me to say, but allowing some people to use the court rather than none may be, something that the community would be amenable to. So those are just two examples, Mr. Mayor, that are the reason that I would like to speak to asking staff to explore other options to mitigate the noise without taking away access to the courts. That's really the essence of it. I don't know if that's what, closing down days is one of them, as Councillor Braithwaite has said, but there may be other options that staff can come up with for us as well.
Okay. So I just want to put that into the form of a motion so that we can have it at this table for consideration. So you would also like staff to come back with other options for potential noise mitigation, such as fines, paddles, or other solution, or other technological or other solutions. Is that fair?
Yeah, that do not take away access to the courts. That doesn't, yeah.
Right.
But gives the residents some relief from the noise. Yeah. It's noise mitigation that address the residents' needs, that to be quite specific.
Okay.
Okay.
So that do not reduce access and address
Yeah.
the noise. Okay, I'll just leave it as noise mitigation.
Point of clarification on that, if I could, Mayor.
Please go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, just because I feel, I guess, that we're this is getting very all-encompassing now rather than a narrow revision on this. And I would think that if you get into looking at the equipment, and doesn't that get into more of the regulations for courts when we didn't really have, the courts were not established and have never come before council as a something that had a public engagement framework around them. So I'm just concerned that we go too far down that path of trying to say, use this kind of equipment, which would really get more into the kind of the operational side of it, that I would lead to staff to the regulations for play had the courts been actually developed as staff recommended playing fields. So, I'm hoping, I'm hoping at least, I think, for maybe a more mitigated. I just think that we're creating a whole large project here instead of the perhaps narrower solution. So I just looking for some clarification there as to how far we're going on this.
Well, it's up to this body as to how far we're going to go on this. I think, I think we have to be a little bit, we have to be thoughtful on this one as to what we're going to ask for. We're asking for a report back at this point, so we'll have some information to go off of. However, I think there's a potential of actually delaying work if we ask for too many things and ask for a totally fulsome report on all the possible options. And I think this ultimately council is going to have to decide whether we want to take some short-term actions and some and look at things a bit more longer term if that's a piece, and where those fit into this overall puzzle. I see your point on this one. It could be as big as huge or small as just a couple of options. So that's always a bit difficult for staff, but I don't think it's out of order to make the request as Councillor Ney has put it. So at this point, there's an amendment motion to also include a request that staff provide other options for noise mitigation that do not reduce access. And I put in brackets there, sort of fines, paddles, etc., things that don't reduce the access. So that's been moved. Is there a seconder for that? I actually don't see a hand up. So, there we go. Councillor Braithwaite, you got a hand up. Okay. So that is now moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion on that motion? And I see hands up right now, but if you can just put your real physical hands up, I'll take those in terms of the actual motion to amend, not just to broadly speak. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess as the initiator of the original motion, I guess I would just make the point that speak in agreement with some of the comments that you just made, Mr. Mayor, just with regards to scope. And I'm happy for my colleagues to make whatever amendments they see fit. But I guess I would just make the comment that the tone of my original motion was intended to be something that was actionable and had a certain degree of definition and time limitation around it, recognizing that the long-term planning for pickleball as a sport and as a concept in the district is a larger discussion. My original motion was made with the intent of coming up with a structural solution or a structural improvement for the immediate topic. So I would just make that point. Just as you mentioned, Mr. Mayor, the scope of this could expand to include any number of different elements. That was not the intent of my original motion. The intent of my original motion was to look at a structural solution to the immediate concern.
Okay, fair. And the motion to amend to include that is what we're talking about right now. So this is, I'm just looking for, I don't see any other hands up to speak to the amendment motion to include the other options for noise mitigation. So all of those in favor, so this is not to approve it, but to add it to the list of things to consider. The motion to amend, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? I have can you just keep your hands up? Councillor Zelka, Councillor Appleton, and Zelka, Patterson, Appleton opposed. So that I see a late hand. Councillor Green, is your hand going up? I just need a yes or no. Are you opposed or in favor of the motion?
I'm in favor. Sorry.
Okay.
My hand was late.
Okay, so that carries. And so we'll consider that as a separated piece of the overall motion. Are there any other amendments that people wish to make before we that we can consider? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. One more item for our checklist approach in terms of directions to council. And I appreciate the fact that you're going to be dividing this question and we have a chance to run through this list and probably approve some of them and not approve others. What I'd like to suggest to being part of this list is okay, so we're kind of coming at this in general.
Can you just give a motion and then we can speak to the motion?
Yes. Whereas Oak Bay has a long tradition.
No whereas, please just give a motion, and then you can motivate after you've made the motion.
Yes, ask staff to work with the Victoria Regional Pickleball Association to look at governance issues and explore what assistance they are offering and how they wish to contribute to the solution. In the email, they actually are offering assistance. I'd like staff to explore what that means. That's the essence of my motion.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Now you can do your motivation, Councillor Zelka.
We have a long tradition of working with third-party associations, whether it's Urban Wildlife Stewardship Society, the Carnarvon lawn bowling folks, Kiwanis, lots of other groups who are helping and assisting and working with staff to deliver services to our citizens. So I'm hoping and wondering and certainly desiring an association with the Victoria Regional Pickleball Association to see if maybe they can assist to facilitate and maybe calm this area down and possibly backfill the lack of public engagement that got us into this situation to some extent. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to make sure it's moved and seconded. Sorry to put you on the spot, Mr. Meikle. I know you've already been in communication with them. Is there anything? I guess your feeling is this necessary, or is it a hindrance to have it in a motion? I just want to make sure there's nothing from staff's perspective that has any concerns about this sort of motion.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair. I don't know that I think the initial discussion with VRPA is fine. I'm not sure that some of the suggestions actually fall within their mandate and their scope. So that would be what we would start with exploring. I don't know that they're in a position to offer the kind of support that sounds like is being suggested here, but I guess that is the question to ask them.
Okay, so go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would have difficulty supporting that amendment. And my reason for that is not that I am opposed to having district staff communicate with the Pickleball Association. I think, as Councillor Zelka said, we do have a background of doing that. But as pickleball originally started, driven by the pickleball players, who I have to believe then went on to form the association, without the engagement of residents in the community, and by instructing staff to, we do not have a parks committee at this point in time, as we talked about earlier. If we had a parks committee, I would expect that we would have representation on a parks committee that would have a broader opinion of the community at large. And so that, I would be amenable to that, but to limit public engagement to the group who have directed everything around pickleball without consulting residents, I have difficulty with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Green, do you want to add to the motion is to amend it to include directing staff to engage with VRPA?
I don't know, add to it actually, and this is just a general comment, but I'm worried that we're getting so complicated with this motion, when in essence what we want to do is solve the access issue to courts, solve the noise issue for residents, and possibly relocate or find new options for pickleball. And I'm worried that this is getting very convoluted, but that's just a general comment, and it's not meant as a criticism, just an observation.
It is getting complicated. No criticism taken, but it's I'm trying to get some direction from us to staff, because they've exhausted the options that they've had to deal with. So the motion here is to direct staff to go and engage with VRPA. So I'm going to call the question on this to amend the motion to include that. So go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak a second time on the amendment. I did not mean to imply that this replaces a public engagement. I would hope that Councillor Patterson would hear that this is not to replace the engagement with the public. However, we did get here without some members of the public even indicated that they were surprised that pickleball started there, and they had no idea that there was any public engagement involved to provide that. So I don't want to backfill necessarily, but I wanted to at least provide some aspect of suggestions from the public, so that it could come to a committee of the whole, and we could then continue the public engagement at this council table at a later time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. The motion is to add that to the broader motion. I'll call the question. All those in favor, Councillor Zelka and others, if they don't indicate contrary, and those opposed. I have Councillor Braithwaite, Patterson, Appleton, and Green opposed, so that motion to amend fails. So the motion is as unamended. So I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, essentially 6 aspects of a motion to walk through. Are there any other amendments that members of council wish to bring forward? Okay, so if I may, I look at these essentially as I think the Henderson Court options, and maybe I'll just get some clarification from the mover of that. Is that looking for things in the short term or just in the medium to long term to look at Henderson Court options?
I think either. I mean, I think that eventually what I would like to see is pickleball at Henderson. So long term, but it could be something for short term for right now.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I was thinking if we could maybe separate this to be more clear in terms of some short-term and long-term sort of requests. So I'll leave that for the bodies to decide how they want to deal with that. So I'm going to go through these in order, and we can have debate on each one because I'm going to separate them. But I think they're reasonably straightforward. We've talked at the broader stream, but I certainly welcome people's opinions. So the first portion of this motion, which was put forward, which is to direct staff to come back with options, including costs for the lacrosse box this year. I think that was specific to seeing what was possible to be done this year. Is that correct, Councillor Appleton?
Actually, what I said, Your Worship, was on a 1-year timeline. So I guess
Okay.
I would say within a year from the motion being made, I guess.
Sure. Okay. I mean, at the end of the day, options are coming back, so there's no firm pieces, but the intention there is to indicate that it's a more of a short-term piece of coming back.
That's correct, Your Worship. What is the crux of the motion is trying to get to a structural solution quickly for the adjacent residents.
Great, thank you. So that portion of the motion, is there any other debate on that? I haven't spoken really on any of these, so I'll very quickly, I would support this. I think a short-term solution, it's not a long distance, but it provides options for some acoustical barriers that we couldn't do when they would block all the sunlight from someone's yard. We could do it in lacrosse box. So I think that is a very supportable approach. I don't see any other discussion, so I'm going to call the question on that portion. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, that passes. The second part of that was also to look for the crossbox at noise mitigation measures. Is there any discussion on that item? Not seeing any then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. We also have asked to ask staff to come back with the possibility of looking at some pickleball. I keep calling it pickleball free evenings, but there's probably a better term for it than that. But as a synopsis, is there any further discussion on that? No, I think we've talked about it. I again, to me, this falls directly into the thing of some potential ways of looking at some short-term relief for the neighbors. So I think it's certainly worth looking at if we can do that as a simple solution. But leave it to the council to see where they're fitting. Is there any other discussion on that one? Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Yeah, the only reason I'm not happy with this, I would like to explore other options rather than closing the park down. So I won't vote in favor of this one.
That's fair. So any other discussion on this? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. And I think that just to clarify, Councillor Ney, I wasn't suggesting that we close the park down. It's just that it would be signed to say no pickleball on those particular nights.
Oh,
In any case,
okay.
but I think again that would be coming back with options for that, what those could look like. So I don't see any other hands up, so I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? You're good, Councillor Ney, as it's worded. Okay, thank you. That passes. And then also direction to direct staff to go and bring back options for some potential pickleball courts at Henderson. Again, not replacing tennis courts at this point. This is for options for net new pickleball courts in the Henderson area. Any other discussion on that one? Not seeing any, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. We have another portion of the motion to include engaging an acoustical consultant as part of this process. Is there any other discussion on this particular one? If I don't mind, I just to Councillor Patterson, who made the motion, I struggle with this one a little bit. I understand the rationale for wanting to do it, but I would want to do that for the long-term solutions and maybe not so much for the short-term solutions to try something where something better might be sufficient. But I just, I guess I'll just go to you just to maybe if you could just
If I
your
could,
expectations on that.
yeah, if I can just speak to that, Mayor, I appreciate that. you know, yes, definitely a longer term solution. We should definitely involve an acoustical consultant, but I am also considering that depending on the availability of a consultant, they can also provide some cost-effective, perhaps shorter term solutions to providing acoustical buffering, depending on where the courts are located. So, you know, yes, it can be costly, but sometimes the consultants can also provide some ideas or forewarning that you might be creating problems for yourself. So I'm not looking for a full-blown parks report from the acoustical consultant. Initially, it would be things to watch for, things to be aware of, or things to consider. Is that more reasonable? Does that explain what I'm getting at?
I think it helps provide some clarity. Councillor Appleton, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just speaking against the motion, unfortunately, at this stage of the game, I'm just a little bit concerned about the scope of what's being asked here, what's being asked of staff. I think what's become clear to me through the discussion, and I think this is that council has considered this before, is that the topic of pickleball in the district overall is something that we will need to talk about in a fulsome way in the future, just given the expansion of the sport. So I would concur that an analysis of essentially the acoustic impact is going to be necessary. I just don't think it's necessary at this time. I think it would be included in a more fulsome analysis of the where and the how of implementation of pickleball more fulsomely across the district. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Zelka.
I also won't be supporting the motion, other than what we've already approved with respect to the lacrosse court. Yeah, just because it's a temporary solution, I'd rather look at space and distance as a way of mitigating sound, as opposed to anything more technologically sophisticated. For a longer term solution, I would definitely look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other discussion on this item? So I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor of the acoustical consultant and those opposed? I have Councillor Appleton, Zelka, Braithwaite, and myself opposed. So that does not pass. And then we have include other options for noise mitigation, including, well, other options for noise mitigation as well, coming back that would not reduce access. That was your motion, Councillor Ney. Is there any of the discussion that people have on this particular one? It was narrowly approved, so I just want to give a chance for anybody to ask questions or clarification before I call the question. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and similarly to my previous point, I can see the value in the analysis that's being proposed here, but again, just the scope of work for staff and kind of what might need to be included in such an analysis, I'm a little concerned about that. So similarly to my previous comments, I would see this being included in a more fulsome review of pickleball in the district overall. So I would not support it this time.
So
go ahead, Councillor Ney.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, what I had in mind here was that staff just explore more deeply, more expansively, other options to keep with the status quo, i.e. that the courts could continue to be left open to the public, but mitigate the noise. It's really for the purpose of keeping things in place and not to create more complications about the use. So.
Yep. Yeah, Councillor Braithwaite, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think just to add to Councillor Ney, I mean, I seconded the motion originally, and I think that in my mind, what I also heard, I thought Councillor Ney say was that perhaps we would, perhaps staff would be able to come back and tell us what it might cost to have, for example, bylaw officers be there to kind of police, if you will, the courts at certain times as well, because that might help keep the status quo of what was of the times that the courts were open. So I was kind of thinking around that. I mean, I may be wrong, Councillor Ney, that you didn't mean that, but that's kind of where I was going with that. And that kind of came out in the staff report, that they didn't give us that information because they felt that it was a budgetary item and they didn't know how much it would add to the budget. So perhaps we could find out.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this? My 2 cents on this one is I think I wasn't very keen on supporting it to start with. I think that it adds a little bit of muddying to some clearer direction, but I think hearing that what's been talked about, I'm okay with it. I just so I'll support the motion as it stands. I think that staff have done an awful lot of work to try and find these alternate things with technology and pieces. And I know we have some limitations, and I will say personally, I wouldn't support, jacking up fines or anything of that nature, because I think it would be, it'd be counter to the intention that we have of providing free space for people. But I think the ask is reasonable given what I've heard, so I can support this as it is. Any other discussion on the item? All right, I'm called the question then. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Zelka opposed. So that passes. That concludes the motions that were made to the amendments to the final motion. So we are concluded on that. But if there's anybody else who wishes to add anything, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think that we were also asked to make the staff report titled "Pickleball at Carnarvon Park," authored by Steve Nico, Manager of Recreation and Culture, be received.
Always good to have that pro forma. Moved and seconded. Thank you. No motivation required. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you for that, Councillor Patterson. Just keeping me on my procedural toes there to make sure I follow it. I don't see anything else that needs to come out of this at this point. With those reports will come back to council. I just want to express to the residents who have put up with the noise, thank you for your patience in this as we try and find a solution. And to the pickleball users who have tried very hard, I know, and are really enjoying their sport, and we don't want to impinge that joy. But really, I also want to just thank staff who have been in the middle of all this for a long time and have tried to find solutions through voluntary, semi-voluntary, assisted, neighbor assisted, all kinds of mechanisms to try and find a middle path that has not worked to this point. So they've done great work to get there, and it's in front of us now to get this. So I'm hoping this moves it forward and we can find a reasonably short-term solution to help find a middle path. So so thank you to staff for all the work that's gone into this. With that, we are moving on to the second and last item on the agenda, hopefully a little less in time frame than the last one. But if I might invite Ms. Winter to present a summary of the report, the very fulsome report, obviously, with a number of recommendations. Welcome, Ms. Winter.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a pleasure to be here. So, Council will recall that this issue about people trapping raccoons in Oak Bay surfaced most recently last fall of 2020. And there was some discussion, and I know some staff had been working on the topic and trying to move ahead. Council gave direction to staff to explore options. One option of which could have included a ban on trapping of raccoons in Oak Bay. So I had the pleasure of working on the project. And what I tried to present for you was a regulatory framework, because it's not simple and straightforward. It's not, and as I've learned, it's not even black and white, even though really the management of wildlife in British Columbia is under provincial jurisdiction. Local governments still do have some tools that they can use. So what I ended up with was a series of recommendations ranging from short-term, which could be implemented pretty much immediately with minimal impact on resources, both staff time and financial resources, and then some longer-term options to address the subject as well. One of the issues is raccoons are very cute looking animals. And, you know, sometimes we like to see them in our urban settings. But the province does classify them as what they call a Schedule B animal, which means they can be considered a nuisance. And so there are provisions in the Wildlife Act to address nuisance wildlife, such as raccoons. So I had to take that into account when developing the recommendations for you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Winter. And they're laid out there sort of in short and long term. I'm just going to, as a courtesy, because we're actually approaching our at 10 o'clock, we have to have a motion to extend if we need to do that. And I just want to, as a courtesy to members of the public that are attending, and one person, Ms. Lund, has registered to speak to council. I'm just going to use my prerogative here and just allow Ms. Lund to address council. And if there's anybody else who wishes to, we can do that. And then we'll come back to this table and move through this a bit more procedurally. So if Ms. Lund is ready, I see her just unmuted herself. Welcome to the meeting, and we welcome your input.
Thank you so much. So we're finished with pickleball.
Well, it's coming back again.
It's coming back again.
Yes,
fabulous. I don't know if anybody counted how many puns were said during that 2.5 hours. There were a lot of puns. You rewatch the video and count them. So thanks for letting me speak. I just want to thank council for arranging that creation originally of the Urban Wildlife Report. I've gone through it really well, and I believe a huge thanks also to Councillor Green. I believe she was the one who initiated this initially. Joanna Winter's report was really, really comprehensive, very sensible, and she seems to have spoken with many different parties. Lots of people were consulted. It takes many concerns into consideration, and I would urge council go through the report, as I'm sure you will, and it really is, it's thorough. In the near future, there, suggestions of things to implement, as you mentioned, and I would say, please do implement all of the report's recommendations. The report took into consideration the humane treatment of these Schedule B animals, such as raccoons, and the rules and regulations that are needed. We know that raccoons can get into people's attics and sheds, and although they might be cute to look at from afar, they can, create havoc. But we do have to deal with that and look at where they're creating a problem. Is it just on someone's lawn, or is it in their house? So it also looked at the humane treatment of the animals, the use of the bylaw, the noise bylaw, in addressing concerns of neighbors that are hearing the distressed animals. And it also was really great mentioning education for residents and how to deter these conflicts. So I'm particularly pleased that there's a recommendation that all leg hold traps would be banned. And it sounds like box traps would be the only things that are allowed, and a licensed trapper would need to be setting those out. So I just have 3 little questions for you to take away to think about or to discuss. First one, maybe the licensed trappers, they would have permits, and would these permits be checked? Do we know that the trappers really do have permits, and who follows up on that? So that'd be the first one. Who makes sure that the trapper is following the regulations that Oak Bay may agree to put in place? And then the second thing that I'm wondering is, will baited box traps be allowed? And that might be something for you to discuss. Is it fair to bait any traps? So if we're only left with box traps, could those be baited? Because if I was a hungry little Schedule B critter, I might like to go in and have a look at that food, and it might stop me on my original destination, and I might pop in and be trapped. And the last one, how as a community are we wanting these trapped raccoons to be killed? Because they are not relocated, they're actually killed. Do we want them to be poisoned? Do we want them to be shot? Do we want them to have their throats slit? Do we want them to be disposed of behind closed doors or drowned? Because most of those choices, I've actually, I know residents in Oak Bay have witnessed that happening, unfortunately. So those are the 3 things that I would ask that you take this report to heart, read it thoroughly, I support the recommendations. I hope you will as well. And then give a little thought to the question about the licensed trappers, the baited box, and how will these trapped raccoons be disposed of humanely. And that's all I wanted to mention tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. London. Thank you very much for your interest in the subject and your comments. Very much appreciated. And thanks for your patience as well, sitting through the last item. It was a long one to get through. So
no worries.
So back to now. There's another caller I see on our list here, Ms. Williams. Is that a caller that wishes to speak to this item?
No, Your Worship. That is a staff member.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So with that, back to this table, we have the report in front of us. Are there any questions of the committee to Ms. Winter? Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
I may have missed it in my read through, and it was just mentioned. Relocation is not an option here with the animals. Is that right, Ms. Winter? Through you, Mayor.
Sure, Ms. Winter.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Ney. Relocation is permitted within 1 kilometer of where they're trapped.
And so that's not. Well, what send them over to Saanich is not a consideration. Okay, thank you.
I think
if I may, Your Worship, just to clarify, if you are a licensed trapper, you're permitted to transport the animal further afield to kill it. But if you're doing it as a resident in your own backyard, no.
Thank you. Councillor Green. Oh, sorry, I had Councillor Green and then Braithwaite.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to Ms. Lund for calling in tonight and for her patience, not only tonight, but since this issue was first raised with Mayor Murdoch last year, who then asked if I would become involved. So really the leadership comes from Mayor Murdoch, I have to say. And I would also like to thank Ms. Winter for a really excellent report. Thank you so much. And just a question, and I just wondered if Ms. Winter had looked into this. She and I had talked about this briefly, but is baiting a trap equivalent to feeding wildlife? And I just wondered if she had managed to get any clarity on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Ms. Winter?
Thank you, Your Worship. I did review that because that was one of the we thought might be a very elegant and simple solution. It's not quite that straightforward. It would, I believe you are still allowed to bait them, but not necessarily, not with poison. So it may require some fine tuning and some consultation with conservation officers and wildlife biologists with the province.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Winter, for this report and for all the recommendations. I think it's a very good list of recommendations, and I hope that we'll be able to complete all of them at some point. But I do have one question, and Mayor, I think it might have to go to staff rather than Ms. Winter. One thing that struck me in the report was that Oak Bay doesn't have a firearms discharge regulation bylaw. I was a little bit perplexed with that. So I'm hoping that someone can give me some clarification around that, because I would have thought that we would have a firearms discharge regulation, but I'm sure that there's something there that I'm just missing.
Sure. Probably Ms. Winter actually is the most up to speed on that one. I imagine. Ms. Winter, do you, are we alone in that? What's the story without the firearms discharge?
Thank you, Your Worship. We're not alone in that. The police chief has reviewed the report, and Ms. Varela may wish to speak further to that, and said that he supports the idea in the feedback, the comments that I saw.
Ms. Varela,
I don't know if that's a full answer, but
Your Worship, to date, I would surmise that direction hasn't been provided to create such a document, and therefore it hasn't been actioned. I don't have the corporate knowledge, but certainly this is how these reports or guiding documents come to fruition, is through discussion and exploration of other topics. So that's where we're at with this one. And certainly I would reiterate that the police chief would support creation of that document.
Thank you. Thank you. My understanding of it, and I could be wrong, is that there's a it is governed by provincial rules as well in terms of discharge within a certain distance of living areas stuff. I don't know if there's any place in Oak Bay that would be far enough away to allow it, but there probably is up on UVic lands and things like that, probably at places. So obviously not causing a major issue right now, but something that probably should be addressed in the future.
Okay, thank you so much.
Councillor Zelka.
There we are. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So I have been a licensed trapper when I lived in Ontario, and I would occasionally get called by neighbors to deal with these what's referred to as Schedule B animals, or rodents in the parlance of the common non-legal terms. So having had a chance to do what's referred to also as harvesting and dispatching, the problem with going through this word by word, as important as it is, it's sort of like it's hard to enjoy the sausage when you know how a sausage is made. So it's important to know, but it's also a bit squeamish. I very much appreciate the report, and I look forward to some of these recommendations possibly being folded into some of our bylaws. I do note, for example, with respect to firearms, the BC Firearms Act, regulates safe firearms usage. I would certainly look towards our fire chief, our police chief, to advise us on whether we need to have a discharge aspect. But I think it's fairly clear that no one's going to be hunting, since you can't get a hunting license in this area. It's not allowed, and you can only use a firearm while hunting. Anyway, so there are other regulations that generally at the provincial level keep, for example, that aspect from being used in any sort of legal way. Plus, it makes a lot of noise, so I'm sure a noise bylaw also applies. So I thank the person for providing all this information. I don't know about whether we need to implement this in the short term. I've not heard of any major issues occurring across Oak Bay with respect to rodents or Schedule B animals, excuse me. But I do look forward to when these issues do occur, that we have the information now available to us to implement bylaw changes as needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Green, you have your hand up. I think it's probably not unreasonable to consider motions at this point, as we're getting later in the evening, and we can speak to the motion as well if you wish.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually do have a motion drafted, if my colleagues are prepared. So thank you. And just to comment on Councillor Zelka's last comment, there have in fact been some incidents of a very unsavory nature around this issue. So they have occurred in Oak Bay, which really actually prompted our getting involved. Thank you. So I do have a motion, and please, if Ms. Williams wants to jump in at any point, please do. I'm not, she always guides us on these motions, and it's really helpful. But my motion is to discourage the use of trapping in the district through education, awareness, and deterrence, and intended to enforce humane trapping and subsequent killing of animals only as a last resort and as permitted under provincial legislation. Direct staff to amend the existing animal control bylaw and implement the short-term mitigations as contained in the report as follows, and that would be 1.1, 1.2, and this is page 17 and 18 of the report, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 3.2, 4.1, 4.3, 1.4, and 3.1. And my rationale, if you would like me to speak to that motion, I would appreciate, that, Mayor.
I would second it if
Or
you
just
like.
moved it. Yeah, so it's moved and seconded. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. This is when people get, rattled a little bit on process. Those are all of the short-term recommendations in the report that require no additional resources. The only two that may require additional advice is 1.4, or 1.4 and 3.1. And Ms. Winter has noted that in her report. And the only other question I had was in terms of the longer term mitigations, these I'm assuming will be rolled up into a wider overview or revision of the animal control bylaw, which Ms. Varela mentioned earlier this year was forthcoming within the next few months. So if we don't need a motion to include the longer term recommendations in that revision, assuming that staff would do that, then I would not make a second motion in that regard.
Thank you, Councillor Green. It's probably worth just going to staff to understand timelines, et cetera, for that, because I'm not sure it's the next few months. Perhaps I'm not sure if I should go to Ms. Williams or Ms. Varela on this one in terms of the longer term pieces, if they would automatically fall into that animal control bylaw review that is coming forward. Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So yes, it could. Some of the longer term, I'm going to have to speak with the team about how we fold this into the fall review for strategic planning, where we'll be looking at capacity and budget and those sorts of things. So again, it's if council chooses to action us with the longer term items, and we'll incorporate those in the work plans and allocate budget as appropriate. And you'll be having a chance to do that earlier in the year, this year, than you previously had. So we'll be looking at those discussions in November, if that helps council with their decision making tonight.
So just procedurally, the question was, we have this motion that's on the floor right now, which is really just dealing with the short term pieces in the report. The question was really, should we consider a second motion to just direct that the items 2.1 through 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and 4.2 be referred to be included for consideration as part of the larger animal control bylaw review process. And I think probably procedurally that would make sense so that they don't get lost, but I don't know, Ms. Varela, if you feel that's necessary or not.
And it's the challenge in me answering, Your Worship, is the fact that there are multiple bylaws referred to. So the firearm discharge bylaw, wildlife attractant bylaw, there's a number of bylaws that are actually referred to in that. So that will take up additional capacity and resources, which is why it's flagged for longer. What I can commit to is folding this process into the 2022 work planning process and seeking council direction prior to the development of those work plans.
Okay, there you go. Councillor Green, that's the answer available.
I just have a further question then. Are the short-term amendments, will they be implemented over the short term?
Ms. Varela, if this passes, Ms. Varela?
Yes, Your Worship, we would look to implement those in 2021. I might have to bring back 3.1 for additional consideration, as there are bylaw enforcement capacity issues at the time. And we're going to need some direction for existing staff about where council wants the energy of bylaw enforcement focus. So it will be a discussion. 3.1 will have to come back again.
Thank you. I think just quickly, I'll just add some comments, and then I think one of the reasons that the short-term amendments are important is because we have had an ongoing issue in Oak Bay that has caused great consternation among neighbors, and it has been a very traumatic experience for some children who live nearby as well. So I think that was the concern, that the short-term amendments be implemented as soon as possible, around the fact that this had a sense of urgency when it first came to us. And that urgency has not necessarily dissipated, but I have to thank neighbors, and especially Ms. Lund, for their patience and willingness to allow Oak Bay to work through the process. And again, I'm also grateful to our own staff and to Ms. Winter, because without this report and without the background and the research that occurred, we would not have gotten this far at this point in time. So I'm very grateful for that on behalf of the residents as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I need a point of procedure here. We're going to run out of time under our procedures bylaw in about 2 minutes. So I just need a motion.
I'll make a
to extend by 15
motion.
minutes.
I'll make a motion to extend by 15 minutes.
Moved and seconded. This has to be unanimous. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? I have a number of hands up. I'll go Councillor Zelka, Patterson, Appleton.
Thank you, Chair. I seconded the motion because it was focusing just on the short-term aspects, and I see that short-term isn't exactly defined, so it provides flexibility for staff to, I believe, to work these items as best they can within within the work plans. And I certainly want to give staff as much flexibility as possible, since these are important. And I very much appreciate that the educational aspects, which will hopefully mitigate anything having to do with respect to item 3.1 and the bylaw enforcement, because I certainly don't want to see any enforcement unless it's absolutely required, only because the person hasn't been educated or didn't receive the education or see the marketing aspect of it. I did have one quick question related to this, though, if I may, please, through you to staff on item 4.1. It says may not use a trap unless authorized by permit. Just want to confirm: is this an Oak Bay permit or is this a trapping permit issued by the province?
Sorry, 4.1. I don't see that.
1.4. I'm sorry.
Okay,
My dyslexia is showing.
No, it's good.
1.4.
Thank you. Ms. Winters.
Thank you, Your Worship. This would be issued by the province. There are two types, but yes, you can't trap without having one of those permits.
Thank you. I just wanted to ensure that there's no additional bureaucracy being built within Oak Bay for Oak Bay issuing trapping permits. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, then Appleton.
Get to unmute. Thank you, Mayor. I just would like clarification on this then, if by adopting the short-term parts of this document, that it would in fact trigger response by bylaw enforcement for noise complaints, or would that then wait until 2.3 was incorporated into the long-term planning? Just clarification, if I could, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I think, Ms. Varela, you spoke to this in terms of the actual use of 3.1.
Yes, Your Worship. So right now, we would have a hard time meeting council's expectation if you requested us to enforce the noise bylaw in this context. So we have currently 0.5 of an FTE for bylaw enforcement. So the nature of this needs to be explored further with council. There could be overtime implications associated with it that we haven't currently got in our budget, things like that. So it's a more complex issue. I would prefer that 3.1 was left off and staff brings a more robust conversation back to council. But again, I will take direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, if I could just continue, because there's two that look to me like they are overlapping, and that is 3.1 and 2.3. One is the good neighbor bylaw with respect to noise and nuisance properties, and the other is really enforcement of the noise bylaw. So perhaps Ms. Varela could also speak about the 2.3. I'm wondering if that, how that would be incorporated and what it would take to do that, or if that is something that could be added to the website as good practices.
Again, Your Worship, those would be a different tool that we aren't currently recognizing as within our existing capacity in the short term.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the approach to dealing with the recommendations that Councillor Green's proposed. I'm definitely in support of the vast majority of what's contained here. I personally am not out of all of these things. There's a lot of really solid content here. Out of all of these, I do not support recommendation 1.4 with respect to requiring an external permit, because I feel it places an undue limitation on folks who have to act quickly to deal with an imminent problem. So I'm concerned about that level of bureaucracy that might delay somebody taking action on something which can be, let's be honest, destructive. So I would make a motion to amend to remove point 1.4, recommendation 1.4 from consideration at this time.
Moved. Is there a seconder to remove that from the list? I don't see us. Oh, Councillor Green, you're seconding?
If procedurally I can do that. And the only other comment I was going to make was, I was prepared to amend my motion to remove 3.1 from this particular motion.
Well, we have a motion to amend right now to remove 1.4. Anything else you wish to add to that, Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly, as I say, you know, I think that if we follow the other recommendations to restrict the type and usage of traps, and we restrict it to those traps which we feel are humane in application, I would not want to pose an obstacle to a landowner in the district who sought to take action on a short term to deal with an imminent issue. There are clearly, I think the bulk of what's in the recommendations is supportable, but we need to also recall that there are immediate issues of damage to property and concern about health issues sometimes when you're dealing with these things, and I would rather that those things that a landowner be able to deal with that in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I see one of the members of the public putting up a hand to speak. We don't normally allow people from the public to speak again on a topic once you've had the input on here. If it just give us the opportunity to have the conversation at this table. We have a motion on the floor. It's not really the opportunity for, no, this is just a recommendation at this point. It will come back when it comes forward. Is there any other discussion on this one? I'll just say I don't support the change. I think I appreciate it does say there that it may require some legal advice, and they may come back and say that that's not possible, or we have to revise and be careful about the wording of it. But I think there's one of the pieces here is that maybe it's overstepping. I don't know, but it's I think it's there just from some of the experiences that have happened where people without the permits are undertaking sort of non-humane ways of going about trapping and pieces. And so the permit process from the province or conservation officer involved ensures that humane approach is taken. And I think that's why that piece is in there. So I have a hard time removing that without having that sort of legal advice that would be triggered by this piece. So, Councillor Green.
Thank you. Just for information, I seconded this amendment for discourse and discussion. I guess my concern is that if one or two of these recommended amendments are going to risk the success of the motion, that's a real concern to me. So I would hate to see this motion fail on the lack of one or two of the motions. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for simplicity's sake, I will then use my prerogative. I will take, since there's two, item 1.4 and 3.1 have been raised as potential. So I'll do the block without those two, and then I'll call vote separately on the other two to simplify it. So given that change, Councillor Appleton, are you okay to remove your motion to remove, and we can just to get to that point when it comes forward as a separate piece?
So just to clarify, Your Worship, you're talking about voting separately on removing both 1.4 and 3.1. So
correct.
Separate vote on. Yeah, that makes sense.
Procedurally, and you're okay with that, Councillor Green? Okay. So is there any other discussion on these items, or people wish to pull anything else out or to discuss any of the line items? I'm not seeing any. So as I said, I'm going to just call the first block, which is just for clarity on page 17 is 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 3.2, 4.1, and 4.3 are the ones as a block that I'll call the vote on. So the motion is to approve those, or essentially sending them to staff for continuation. Is there any other discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not Councillor Appleton, that was a late hand. Okay, we're good. That passes without opposition. Then I'm going to pull up 1.4, which is the people can read it there on their agenda packages. Any other discussion on 1.4? I just note that this was moved in consideration to remove it, so I just want to make sure people take a moment to think before I call the question.
Sorry, Your Worship, are you is the motion to remove or the motion to retain?
The motion is I'm just leaving them as they were. So this is now a motion to approve. So if you're not in favor, you would vote against. Thanks for ask for the clarification. So we're ready to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? I have Councillor Green, Councillor Zelka, and Councillor Appleton opposed. So that passes. Not seeing any other hands. And then item number 3.1, which is employ the existing noise bylaw for complaints. And again, any discussion on that item? I don't want to not acknowledge Ms. Varela's, oh, go ahead, Councillor. I'll say my piece and then I'll go to Councillor Green. I don't want to not acknowledge Ms. Varela's point on this one. I guess if I just get a bit of clarification, if this passes, to my mind, it would enable the enforcement of the noise bylaws, but it wouldn't automatically trigger a policy change at this point. That's my understanding of the way I read it, but perhaps I can ask Ms. Varela just to clarify to me what if this passes, what that looks like, because you raised the flag that, in fairness, we honestly can't do that unless the police are enforcing the noise bylaws at this point.
Yeah, so employ the existing noise bylaw for complaints of noise created by trapped animals. A lot of the complaints are coming during the middle of the night. Again, I have 0.5 of a bylaw enforcement officer to deal with items that we may not be meeting the full service level expectancy right now. So I'd hate to set us up for further failure if this isn't something we can actually resource. So again, I'd like to bring it back to a more robust discussion if council actually wants to explore this for 2021.
So just from our clarification, Ms. Varela, if we want to have that more robust discussion, are we better to pass this and then that will trigger it to come back? Or if we don't pass it, then are you suggesting we have a motion to refer it for staff for further information? What's from a procedural perspective?
I would actually, I'm struggling with it, Your Worship, because I think we have to, as we're looking to bylaw enforcement, I feel like I need to bring a larger discussion about bylaw enforcement philosophy to council to say, where do you want us putting the energy of the staff that you've funded? So there is a larger conversation that I'm already structuring to bring to council. So if this is excluded from this block as it is, there's still a much larger discussion of bylaw enforcement pending for council.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Sorry, Councillor Green, I just had to, it started my conversation, so I thought I would finish it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was confused on the last vote. I did not support removing 1.4, and it is regulated by the province, by the way, but so I got confused on that particular motion. I apologize. And
so the motion was to support the motion 1.4, not to remove it.
Okay, so I voted for that, I think, correct?
Yeah, I didn't write down, didn't record it. I just recorded the numbers. So Ms. Williams, can you just make a note that Councillor Green voted to support version 1.4?
In other words, to keep it in.
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Williams, did you capture that?
Your Worship. Just one moment, Your Worship. So the original motion was, how do I say this? Was massaged to exclude 1.4 and 3.1 to allow a vote on those separately so as not to defeat the bigger motion. So the vote that was made on the original one didn't include 1.4.
That's right. But then I called the question on 1.4 as well.
Yes.
And I just want to confirm Councillor Green voted in the affirmative for that vote.
My apologies. We will correct that. We had hers in opposition.
Right. So thank you, Councillor Green, for catching that, because I think she just caught it by the reverse. So thank you, Councillor Green.
Thank you, but it was my fault, not Ms. Williams.
No,
Sorry.
fair.
All good.
Okay, I just want to procedurally, so for clarification, we have 3.1 that I'm going to call the question on, but Councillor Zelka, you had your hand up to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be voting against including 3.1 in the recommendations to go forward. I think instead I would rather see it move towards priorities and be dealt with in a different budget and priority cycle, as I'm sure some of these other items will be moving toward the priorities list. Mainly because what I would do with if I ever encountered this today, I would call the conservation officers service and I would ask for them to deal with the issue having to do with the trapping and the cruelty and of course the resulting noise that comes from that. I would rather do that, since those resources, while not necessarily standing by to serve all of Oak Bay residents, they're there today and they're funded already by the province. So that's what I would rather see have happen, instead of us extending our bylaw services to be 24/7. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Green.
Just to be absolutely sure, would you mind repeating the motion that is going to be voted on just now? Thank you.
Sure. The recommendation is to employ the existing noise bylaw for complaints of noise created by trapped animals. So 3.1.
And that's to keep it in, correct?
This is that's to keep it in. The vote is in favor to keep it, against to drop it for now and have it really, that would form part of the discussion around the broader bylaw.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Nope, that's always good to have clarity. Never need to apologize for asking. If you're confused, probably somebody else is as well. Any other discussion on this one, item 3.1? Don't see any, so I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor of 3.1? And those opposed? I have Councillor Appleton, Councillor Zelka, and Councillor Braithwaite opposed. I too will vote in opposition for that. I think I was going to vote in favor of it, but I take Ms. Varela's point. Anyway, I can't say why. I'll vote in opposition as well. So that fails. So with that, is there any other motions arising from this report? Need a motion to receive. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? No. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? I'm just going to ask for a motion to extend by another 5 minutes. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you. That gets us to 10:20. Any other motions arising out of this report? Councillor Appleton?
I just wanted to clarify, Your Worship, given the discussion on component 3.1 and Ms. Varela's comments, I'm just wondering whether we need to make a specific motion related to including the resource implications from recommendation 3.1 in the upcoming review of bylaw enforcement service levels that Ms. Varela referenced.
Thank you for it's worth having the clarification. Ms. Varela, do you need any additional direction on that?
Your Worship, staff respectfully has this on their radar and we'll bring it back. I don't have the timing of that philosophy discussion buttoned down yet. So I will be bringing that back in a timely fashion. I just can't commit to what that timeline is at this moment.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the report? It's been received. We've made the motions. Not seeing any other hands. I will call that session to a close. I don't see anybody from the public other than Ms. Lind on the call still, but I'll just make a call if there's anybody who wishes to address council on any items of interest to them or to the municipality, you're more than welcome to speak. You just need to raise your hand within the Zoom application, or if you're on the phone, you can hit *9 to effectively raise your hand. Not seeing any, not expecting to see anybody joining in at the last minute. I will then move on. There's no new business, so we just need a motion to
Excuse me,
adjourn.
sorry, Mayor, there is a hand up, Mayor, sorry.
Oh, there is. Thank you. It bumped around my screen there and I didn't see it pop up. Should have seen it come to the surface. Ms. Lund, welcome back. You have up to 3 minutes to address council.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for discussing this tonight. One thing that I didn't speak on, and I always speak about when I'm telling somebody this, I speak about, oh, you know, the raccoons and the suffering of the raccoons. And I wish I had said this before, the suffering of the neighbors when we lay here at night trying to sleep and we hear these raccoons crying. I've seen a raccoon try to eat its own foot off. It turned around and looked at me and it had blood smeared all over its face. They cry for the whole night. Their babies cry as well. It's just hideous. And to know that you'll think about 3.1 is great, because what do we do in the middle of the night when we, even with closed windows, hear these captured animals crying? I have soundtrack of this that I would happily play for anybody, not tonight, obviously. And it's really horrible. It's so stressful. If you can imagine, they're captured at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. They cry until they're killed at 9 a.m. That's a lot of hours to have children and homeowners to listen to crying animals who are panicked. These animals are panicked. And if anybody could sleep through that, well, I don't know how. And so that's why 3.1 is really key to this discussion. Because as a resident, we need recourse. We need to be able to phone somebody at 1 a.m. and say, you know, this has to stop. We deserve to sleep. We have to go to work the next day. We have all sorts of living to do. And it's very difficult to do that when you've been awake listening to animals crying. So thank you. And Mayor Murdoch, yes, thank you to you also, and Councillor Green, way back last summer for starting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lund. I don't see anybody else from the public who has their hand up. Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite, for my eyes must be tired this time of night. So not seeing anything else on this agenda item or under public comment, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Second.
Seconded. All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for the fulsome discussion.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.